My grandfather is the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 201: The Second Egyptian National Uprising. Another benefit of the British monopoly on Egyptian cotton is that they can directly set up factories in Egypt to exploit the cheap local labor and raw materials. In this way, they can further reduce costs and then enter the European market through smuggling and other means to hit the European textile industry. But the British are too naive. How can the European countries led by France and Austria let him do what he wants? The Egyptians use cotton to exchange food from the British, so what do France and Austria use to exchange food with the Egyptians? You guessed it right, that is guns. The British set up factories in Egypt. According to the British's own understanding, it helps local employment and increases the income of the Egyptian people. But in the eyes of the Egyptians, these grandsons actually broke into their homes to catch slaves. In the eyes of the Egyptians, there is no difference between factories and slave estates. Compared with slave estates, factories are obviously more terrible. Because in slave estates, you can still be lazy, and in factories, there are not only supervisors and terrible machines. Please refer to the previous article. Moreover, the efficiency of exploitation by British capitalists is much better than that of Ali's subordinates. In the past, when these Egyptian workers worked in Ali's factory, they would be beaten at most if they did not do their job well or were lazy. Now the British supervisors are much more civilized. They use guns instead of whips and sticks. What's more terrible is that they will impose fines. If they can't pay, they will use consular jurisdiction to directly seize the other party's land and houses. Under the protection of consular jurisdiction, the British spirit of adventure came. Wherever they went, there was chaos, theft, rape, and robbery were rampant. And they unscrupulously collected intelligence from the interior of Egypt to find forces against Ali. In addition, during the Turkish-Egyptian War, the British army had directly attacked the Egyptian army and bombarded Alexandria. The Ali government was not the kind of government that would rather offend the country than blame its friends. So the anger of the Egyptian people was ignited. Winter of 1842. At this time of year, Egypt will not suffer from the scorching heat of 40 degrees, nor will there be dust blowing in the face. Lagarde is a retired British captain. He and others opened a factory in Egypt with good profits. The most important thing is that it can give him the freedom he wants. Lagarde likes to see women cry, and he enjoys the pleasure of beating his wife and daughter. But what he did was illegal in Britain. His wife sued him, and the judge awarded his property to his wife and daughter. Lagarde beat his wife in court because he despised the judge. When Lagarde came to Egypt, he found that the days here were the life he had been looking for. When he saw someone or something that made him unhappy in the factory, he would shoot and kill him, and then treat the consul to drink. If that didn't work, he would treat him to 2 drinks. Lagarde had just caught an ostrich with a friend last night. Judging from her dress, she should be a woman from the upper class of Egypt. He was considering whether to sell the ostrich or bury it directly. After all, the consul had alcoholic liver and might not be able to drink. Ostrich, slang for local women. Lagarde, who was sitting on a high platform and drinking, found that there were rows of black spots in the distance walking towards the factory. They were a group of Egyptians, and they were holding weapons in their hands. Lagarde sobered up half of the wine immediately, and with the intuition of a soldier, he knew that something was wrong. Egyptians should not have guns in their hands, but they were holding guns in their hands now. Lagarde had a bad feeling, but he thought that maybe other forces in Egypt wanted to compete with Ali for the right to rule. Of course, whoever wins has nothing to do with him. After all, whoever wins has to listen to Britain. At this time, an Egyptian suddenly opened fire, and his shooting skills were so poor that he didn't even hit the tower where Lagarde was. But there were less than 10 British people in the whole factory, and there were hundreds of Egyptians in front of him. Lagarde sounded the alarm. They only had 5 rifles and 3 pistols. With a friend, he wanted to mobilize the workers in the factory, but who knew that the workers actually took the initiative to open the door. A fierce battle was inevitable, although there were hundreds of people besieging the factory. In addition to the workers who cooperated with them, they had an absolute advantage in numbers. But there was a huge gap in the quality of the two sides. After paying dozens of lives, they still let Lagarde and his friends run away. Lagarde and his friends ran all the way, trying to seek the help of the consul, at least to let them leave safely. But when they arrived at the consulate, the consul's body was hung on the flagpole, with a copy of the British coat on his chest. The latest novels are published on 69 Shuba. A vigorous anti-British uprising began across Egypt. Chapter 202 Happy Cabinet. The failure of foreign wars, the high-pressure policy of the Ali government at home, and the British who came from afar were rampant in bullying the people. Economically, they were exploited by the feudal bureaucracy of their own country and foreign capitalism. After the decline of the Ali government, the monopoly of the British was even worse than before. Culturally, the Church has been the vanguard of Western cultural penetration since the great geographical discoveries in the 15th century. After the defeat, the Ali government was forced to accept the London Agreement and its additional clauses, which further encouraged the arrogance of the Anglican missionaries. Originally, they were just collecting intelligence and developing believers. In the face of the huge benefits brought by consular jurisdiction, they were unwilling to wear even the hypocritical mask, directly occupying land, trafficking people, distorting facts, and wantonly interfering in local affairs. Politically, they wanted to find a puppet to replace Ali, and ethnic conflicts became increasingly intensified. The Egyptian people were miserable, and even the upper class could not protect their property and wives and daughters. A strong xenophobia was brewing, and finally broke out completely under the guidance of those who were interested. British missionaries were burned alive in churches, merchants' factories were attacked, expatriates were dragged from their homes to the streets and beaten to death, and the consul who acted as a protective umbrella was hanged on a tree. Why are most of the dead British? The British are monopolizing and want to turn Egypt into a colony. Austria is limited by its own national strength and does not have the ability to colonize Egypt, so there will be no big moves. France does have the strength and the will, but the British are wary and exclude them in every way, and some even deliberately use warships to sink French ships to create shipwrecks. Guizot was also called a traitor by the French because he favored the British in the Mediterranean shipwreck. Guizot is more like a businessman who pursues rationalism than a politician. He believes that the most important thing for France to develop its economy and restore its national strength is to tolerate the anger of the Austrians and the British, and even a small country like Sardinia. By the way, Alberto, King of Sardinia, the king of the team, not only rejected the French proposal but also threatened to declare war on France. What happened? Who gave Alberto such courage? Let's listen to the following analysis. There were not many people from other small European countries active in Egypt, and Ali sent troops to protect them as soon as something happened. Ali did not want to offend the whole of Europe, he just wanted to see the British suffer. With Ali's tacit approval, the army also disguised itself as rebels and attacked the British everywhere to plunder property. In less than a month, 5,000 Europeans in Egypt were killed, 4/5 of whom were British. British factories and shops were looted, and the conservative estimate of the loss was more than £2 million. When the news came back to Britain, Palmerston shouted excitedly, "Send troops quickly. Egypt is ours." John Russell, to be precise, was the former British Home Secretary Lord John Russell. Why did he become the former Home Secretary? Because John Russell opposed Palmerston's foreign expansionist diplomatic strategy and Robert Peel's liberal intervention in the market, so he simply resigned. Idiots, Egypt is the next Afghanistan. You are a bunch of fools who only know how to spend money and fight wars. Have you thrown all the gentlemanly manners of Britain into the Thames? Lord John took his belongings and left the cabinet with a curse. Robert Peel seemed much calmer, but he couldn't help laughing. That Albanian kid has given us another big gift. I am considering whether to apply for a Medal of St. Michael and St. George for him. The Medal of St. Michael and St. George is also known as the Order of St. George, which is the highest honorary medal in the UK at that time. Ali is an Albanian, and his direct lineage is also the Albanian Legion, so he is also called Albanian Kid. Others in the cabinet also looked relaxed. After all, there is a huge gap in strength between Britain and Egypt. Now there is such a good reason. At this time, Egypt seems to have become a fish on the chopping board. The latest novel is published on 69shushu.com. But is it really so? Let's look at the next chapter, the Second London Conference. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203 The fish on the chopping board jumped up. Since the Vienna Conference, there has been a tradition in the European diplomatic community, solving problems at the negotiation table. This time was no exception. Robert Peel really couldn't think of how he could lose. This was his first big move after he came to power. He wanted to make a bigger show. After all, this was related to the face of the country and his personal honor. Not only the European powers, Robert Peel also sent out hero invitations to invite envoys from almost all European countries. Needless to say, the secondary powers such as Belgium and Spain, even the envoys from the completely unrelated United States and Brazil were present. In this era, no one except the British could gather envoys from so many countries in a short period of time. After all, not all cities have so many embassies like London. A grand banquet began. As the host, Robert Peel and Palmerston naturally had to do their best to satisfy all the guests. So all kinds of delicacies and fine wines were laid out. Of course, inviting envoys from so many countries was not for eating. As the victims, the British naturally had to report their losses in Egypt several times more, and accused the Egyptians of being bloodthirsty barbarians who should be enlightened by Western civilization. Groups of victims, witnesses, and religious figures also jumped out to speak their minds and asked Britain to send troops to Egypt to spread the light of Western civilization. Then, under the public outrage, Britain was willing to take on the responsibility and send troops to Egypt. In this way, both face and substance were achieved, and the most important thing was that they could get benefits. Although this meeting was just a formality, it was still beneficial to enhance Britain's authority and influence. At this time, Britain had gotten rid of vulgar tastes and no longer regarded itself as a pirate and colonizer. Instead, it liked to regard itself as a disseminator of civilization, a pioneer of the New World, and a gentleman. The plan should have been like this, but there would always be some accidents. At this time, someone suddenly stood up, applauded and laughed, and then preached in broken English. It was the Anglican missionaries and the remnants of Malumac who planned this brutal massacre. I have brought a culprit to you. You can deal with him as you wish. Sell him as a slave or execute him directly as a warning to others. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw a man with a white cloth wrapped around his head and dressed as an Arab noble. The sharp-eyed and knowledgeable people immediately recognized him. Isn't this the Egyptian Pasha Ali? Palmerston, who was tasting the wine, was shocked and sprayed a mouthful of wine on the Luxembourg ambassador. He ignored the angry Luxembourg ambassador and pushed him away and walked straight to the center of the venue. How did this bastard get in? Of course, he came in with Furchak, the Ottoman Grand Vizier. This unlucky Grand Vizier came to see Ali's excitement. But he had the most followers and was the most greedy. Someone took money and brought Ali and his followers in. Nasrullah, Russian foreign minister, covered his mouth and looked very painful, but he couldn't burst out like Palmerston, because in front of him was Prince Metternich, who finally laughed out loud after swallowing the food and wine. The Tsar gave Nasrullah a simple task, neither agreeing nor opposing. But if anyone wants to embarrass Britain, my Tsarist Russian Empire will definitely give them a good show. But he never dreamed that Ali would jump out and throw the pot directly to the Anglican Church and Marumak. Metternich seemed much calmer and calmer. After all, he was an old man and had seen all kinds of storms. Moreover, before he left Vienna, he had found his student Franz. At this time, Franz was being chased by his younger brothers and sisters because he bought exercise books for them. Franz still talked about his views on this trip to London. The British couldn't eat Egypt, just like before. Franz also said that he had sent a reliable person to prepare a generous gift for the British. No matter how things develop, the French and Russians will not sit idly by. Maintaining the balance of power is what you are good at. The latest novels are first published on the 69th book bar. Chapter 204, Revenge of a Nobleman. Andieb Kaiser was born into an Egyptian noble family. His father was once the Vizier of Ali, equivalent to the Prime Minister or Chancellor. After he became an adult, he first went to France, where he was exposed to the bourgeois liberal ideas of Britain. As a result, he admired Britain and went to Britain to start his pilgrimage. Because of his special identity and enthusiasm for Britain, he soon attracted the attention of the British intelligence organization Cambridge. Cambridge is a world-renowned university, but it is also the cradle of British spies. As early as the time of Elizabeth I, her confidant Francis Walsingham was ordered to establish the earliest British intelligence organization to fight against Spain. As an outstanding graduate of Cambridge University, Francis had a very close connection with his alma mater, and he mastered a group of very outstanding talents through the Cambridge fraternity. At that time, Francis had two criteria for selecting spies. The first was a noble birth and a good life, and the second was a fanatical belief in Britain. For hundreds of years thereafter, this was the standard for the British to select spies. At this time, Andy Kaiser perfectly met the above conditions, so he successfully entered Cambridge University for further studies and joined the Anglican Church, in the second year. There are many types of spies, including those who collect intelligence, those who engage in terrorist sabotage, those who engage in assassination and kidnapping, agents who provide funds, experts in deciphering codes, experts in opening mails, etc. Andy was ordered to collect military and political intelligence in Egypt and find all the resistance organizations that can be used, including the Mamluks. As a converted Anglican priest, he went deep into the hinterland of Egypt to find the last Mamluks. However, after half a year of searching, he did not find the legendary rebels, but only got the news of the death of his sister and daughter. Andy brushed back home and learned that his sister and daughter were taken to the embassy area by a group of British people when they went out. The Egyptian military and police had no right to enter at all, but only got two cold bodies 3 days later. The consul's reply was that the cause of death of the two was suicide and had nothing to do with the British side. They were taken away by British doctors who came to treat them. Andy abused his special status to find the British consul. After he argued with reason, the consul said that he would definitely give him a satisfactory answer. On the day of the funeral, it rained lightly. At the funeral of his sister and daughter, Andy declared that the British would definitely give them a satisfactory explanation, because Britain is a country ruled by law, a civilized country ruled by law. But what he waited for was a group of drunk British sailors with rifles, who fired to disperse the crowd. Andy was found and his wife was captured. Is it great to be a Cambridge University graduate? You really think you are English after studying in London for a few days? You are not even as good as the Irish bastards, and you dare to go to the consulate to complain? Today your British grandfather will teach you how to be a dog. After that, the British sailor shot and broke one of Andy's legs. His wife was so scared that she screamed and wanted to support her husband. But she was quickly held down by several British sailors. At this time, Andy was going crazy. He no longer argued with reason, but cursed the British sailors in English for their barbarity and shamelessness. Of course, he was beaten badly. The leading sailor came over and kicked Andy in the face. Then he stepped on Andy's face and made him watch his wife die tragically in front of him. When Andy woke up, the first thing he did was to crawl in the mud to his wife. He held his wife's cold hand, tears burning in his eyes. After his leg healed, Andy seemed to have changed into a different person. He tried every means to sneak into the embassy area. But he couldn't find the group of British sailors because they had been transferred to India. Andy roared weakly, and finally he made a decision. He found Ali, the Egyptian Pasha, who had just sent away a mysterious guest. After learning Andy's story, Ali asked, "Child, are you afraid of death?" "No," Andy answered calmly. "So what do you want?" "I want revenge. The latest novel is first published on the 69th Shuba." Ali took the list of enemies from Andy and paused. "Child, I need you to complete a mission that is almost certain to end in death, as I wish." "Okay. I will take on your revenge. I, the Pasha of Egypt, Ali ben Ibrahim, the descendant of Aga, swear to the great prophet that as long as you can complete this task, my bloodline and I will complete your revenge until death. Thanks to book friends 202108062327111729 and Sai Undong Bifeng for their rewards and XCIE's monthly tickets, as well as the support of all book friends. Chapter 205, Adding Fuel to the Fire. Robert Peel was going crazy. How could such a scandal happen? He turned to look at Colin Firth, the head of the Cambridge organization and the head of security for this meeting. However, the latter was standing there with a dead look on his face. Because Colin Firth knew that everything the man in front of him said was true, except for the sentence under the instructions of the British authorities, an uprising was launched in Egypt to eliminate other European forces. Robert Peel looked at Palmerston again. Palmerston knew that he was the British Foreign Secretary. Palmerston was fully responsible for this incident, and now he should come forward. But in this situation, Palmerston was powerless to save the situation. Time went back to a quarter of an hour ago. Ali's speech attracted the attention of everyone in the venue. The British side had a set of solutions for emergencies, but they didn't expect Ali to appear in person at the venue. The guards in charge of security wrestled with the assassins brought by Ali, but Ali continued his speech without even looking at them. The Egyptian people have loved peace and freedom since ancient times, and have upheld laws and morals. However, the Anglican missionary Jack Brown, and Dieb's English name, and others, together with the evil invaders Mamluk, took advantage of the kindness of the Egyptian people and committed horrific acts. This terrorist act has brought an extremely painful disaster to Europe and the world. I, Ali Ben Ibrahim, will make their crimes public and give the world an explanation. As soon as these words came out, the entire conference hall was like a pot of boiling water, and the delegates at the conference were talking about it. Of course, some people were out of justice, while others simply wanted to see the British laugh. But in any case, this aroused the gossip of these gentlemen, and reporters from various countries rushed over to interview frantically. You know, the people who are most interested in scandals are these dignitaries and reporters who have nothing to do all day. Journalists should report truthfully, but people always have to eat. Palmerston did not arrive immediately, and Robert Peel obviously had no experience and could only shout loudly for the security guards to arrest Ali. Ali was prepared to be arrested or even killed before he came, but he still came. As a king of power, as a man, how could he watch his power fall and be slaughtered? He decided to bet everything. At this time, Guizot stood up and said loudly, "Everyone, be quiet. Don't be deceived by this Egyptian." Robert Peel was very moved at this time. The French brothers are still good. They are still on the side of my Great Britain. At the same time, pro-British factions in various countries also jumped out to defend Great Britain. Impossible. Britain is a civilized and legal country. The Anglican Church is full of religious people. How could they do such a thing? The Egyptians should not slander me. Hang him and avenge the dead. Quiet. Quiet. Guizot stood up again. We Europeans are representatives of civilization. We should hold a public trial for him. Guizot turned to Ali and continued. Then do you have evidence for your unwarranted accusations against Britain just now? Yes, Ali replied. Robert Peel, who was listening with relish, suddenly felt that something was wrong. Then bring out your evidence. I don't know who started the commotion. Hurry up and bring out the evidence. So the elites from all countries gathered together became like the antis in the vegetable market shouting bring out the evidence, and so on. Then Ali's men brought in more than a dozen people, some dressed as priests and some dressed in traditional Arab clothes. And Dieb was pushed to the center of the venue and he began his performance. The latest novels are first published on 69 Shuba. I'm Jack Brown, formerly known as Dieb Sewell. I was hired by the Cambridge organization in the UK. My mission is to collect intelligence in Egypt, bribe officials, develop followers, and find and establish contact with Mamluks. Dieb spoke fluent English, shocking everyone. And as a missionary and a spy, his eloquence is not bad. He described in the most concise and accurate words how he arrived in Britain, came into contact with the British, changed his name, joined the Anglican Church, joined the Cambridge organization, how he entered Egypt, how he conducted espionage work, and even how he transmitted intelligence, as well as how he found the remnants of the Mamluks and planned an uprising. What Dieb said was basically true, but no one knew about the uprising and the physical elimination of Britain's competitors. Intelligence personnel from various countries in the conference hall were basically certain that Jack Brown was a professional British spy. Because it was impeccable from both a technical and intelligence perspective, and it was indeed a common method of British spies. And his status was not low, otherwise he would not have known so much in detail. Now, ambassadors from various countries have believed 70% of what Dieb said. This method of killing with a borrowed knife and using local indigenous people to expel foreign forces for the benefit of their own country is not insignificant. But today, it is not just one or two countries that came, but almost all ambassadors from European countries are present. No matter how strong Britain is, it cannot shut up all countries, and it is afraid that it will not be able to escape the hat of conspiracy and massacre of European expatriates. Just as the British were getting anxious, Nasrallah couldn't hold back any longer. He had been excited to see the British get humiliated. If he could use this opportunity to portray the British as the public enemy of Europe, then Russia's expansion would no longer be hindered. The public enemy of Europe at this time was the Russians, because most of Russia's territory was in Asia, so it was often not considered one of their own by European countries. Then do you have evidence to prove your identity? Chapter 206, Blame. Prove his identity. Dieb was well prepared. He first took out a military medal. This was awarded by the British side to reward him for providing accurate intelligence to Britain many times during the Second Turkish-Egyptian War. Then Andy took out a lot of documents to prove his various identities. As a spy, of course, he has more than one identity. He is also a professor at Cambridge University and a fraternity manager. Then there are the correspondence between him and Cambridge and the Egyptian consul general. Now even the dumbest person knows that this person is indeed a British spy. After the joint certification of France and Russia, the fact that British spies colluded with Mamluks to kill European expatriates has been confirmed. Of course, the British can deny it and pretend that nothing happened. With the strength of Britain, other countries can only condemn it at most, and there will be no actual action. But in this way, if Britain wants to attack Egypt again, European countries can also participate in the frenzy of dividing Egypt under the pretext of protecting expatriates. Britain wants to monopolize Egypt, not make Egypt a protectorate of the whole of Europe. Seeing that the plan to occupy Egypt had failed, should Ali and these so-called culprits be arrested and shot? This would vent the anger, but it seemed that this would also give him a bad reputation for silencing people, and would completely antagonize Ali's successor, which might lead to Egypt's leaning towards France. Most importantly, it would be a devastating blow to Britain's international reputation. It was obvious at the meeting just now that Guizot was helping Britain on the surface, but in fact he was helping Egypt, embarrassing Britain. And Russia's behavior was completely adding insult to injury, wanting Britain to become the public enemy of Europe and even the world. Other small countries, either out of justice or out of personal resentment, added insult to injury to Britain. Public opinion was now overwhelmingly unfavorable to Britain, and Robert Peel had already begun to wipe his sweat. The world has suffered from Great Britain for a long time, and now with the two great powers of France and Russia taking the lead, all the princes in the world responded. But some people are born for big scenes, and they can still remain calm and composed in the face of absolutely unfavorable situations, and become more and more courageous. Viscount Palmerston was just such a person. He pushed the crowd aside and strode forward. Please be patient, everyone. This is just his one-sided statement. The evidence in his hand is even more difficult to distinguish. And Mr. Jack Brown did not join the Anglican Church, but the Ark of Doom. The Ark of Doom was a heretical organization active in Latin America in the 19th century. It aimed to cause disasters around the world to sacrifice lives in order to gain the opportunity to enter the Ark of Doom. It just so happened that not long ago, a missionary of the Ark of Doom created a fire in Manchester and burned 5 innocent civilians to death. Due to the random hype of the unscrupulous media, the Ark of Doom was said to be a mysterious organization with strong power to fight against the entire Western civilization. Originally, such boring rumors could not be spread in the upper class, but in this strange era of the 19th century, the upper class was even more superstitious than the common people. The word cult heresy was still very deterrent, and Jack Brown was not a European, which added a bit of credibility. At that time, Europeans had a very outrageous prejudice against non-Western civilizations, political correctness of that era. The combination of the three words cult, heresy and barbarian instantly reduced Jack Brown's image. Although Palmerston had no evidence and no reason, he stood on the commanding heights of morality. Neither Guizot nor Nasrallah could defend him. The only one who could defend him was Jack Brown himself, who answered almost instinctively. I didn't. However, what he didn't know was that he had been trapped. The latest novels are first published on 69 Shuba. Oh? Really? But Father Jim, who led you to join the Anglican Church, just burned 5 innocent civilians to death in Manchester. No. I don't know any Father Jim, and I have never joined the Ark of Doom. Palmerston smiled slightly. The man in front of him was already confused, and public opinion was also led in the wrong direction. Now, as long as they win in the chaos and put all the blame on the Ark of Doom, Britain can survive this public opinion crisis. But will France and Russia miss this opportunity? What role will Austria play in this? Let's wait and see the next time. Chapter 207, Turning Things Around. Although Jack Brown had been trained as a spy by the Cambridge organization, he was already blinded by hatred at this time. In addition, the fatigue of the journey and excessive tension made him perform poorly. I'm not me. Palmerston would naturally not miss this opportunity and took the opportunity to add fuel to the fire. Say, you are plotting to start a riot, killing innocent civilians, and blaming our country. Are you trying to provoke a civil war in Europe so that you can reap the benefits and destroy the world? Seeing that Jack Brown was just repeating I didn't like a repeater, the attitude of the onlookers changed again, and some people began to believe that this was a conspiracy of the cult Doomsday Ark. Nishnarov cursed in his heart, What a waste. He has to follow the other party's ideas, but in order to restore the glory of the Third Rome, he decided to help. But Guizot spoke first. Don't worry, Viscount Palmerston. This arc of doom also originated from your country, right? This young man is just an executor. Why not let him confess who the mastermind is who colluded with the Mamluks to kill European civilians? Guizot was very confident. Whether the young man in front of him was a member of the Ark of Doom or not, the mastermind he confessed now must be a British. In this way, Britain still could not clear its suspicion. Everything Palmerston did would be in vain, and Britain would truly achieve isolation. Even if Jack Brown really had a problem with his brain and said that Ali instructed him to do it, it was just that many countries intervened to share the benefits and maintain the status quo in Egypt. It would not let the British dominate alone, and Britain's international reputation would inevitably plummet. Palmerston's eyelids twitched. He knew that Guizot, the old man, would definitely have nothing good to say. But he never expected that he would be so vicious. It turned out that he was pretending all those years. Guizot used to be a compromiser, and even hurt his country's interests and dignity in order to avoid conflict with Britain. But after the St. Petersburg incident, Guizot understood that no matter how he gave in, Britain would not miss the opportunity to weaken him. The fault was that France was too far from heaven and too close to Britain. The mastermind of the conspiracy to use the Mamluks to attack Egypt and eliminate other European competitors was Viscount Palmerston himself. The orders were conveyed by Colin Firth, the head of Cambridge. It was obvious that Jack Brown was not stupid. He decided to bite back and take someone with him before he died. It was just that he thought he was not stupid. Metternich had seen enough of this farce. Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister Robert Peel, Mr. Guizot, Countess Selov, you should not continue to be deceived by this man. Since he has admitted the crimes he committed, for the innocent people who died in Egypt, he and these so-called accomplices and Mamluks should be executed immediately. How could Selov sit back and watch the opportunity slip away from him? He hurriedly stepped forward and said, Prime Minister Metternich, you are wrong to say that. Things must be investigated clearly. Whoever is at fault must take responsibility. If he is not at fault, he will be cleared of all charges. Are you going to judge a responsible country because of a criminal's words? Metternich asked back. Nashirlov was silent. Of course, he could continue to ask, is the truth not important? But he knew the answer was not important. Compared with the stability of the international order, the fairness and justice of some people are nothing. Envoys from various countries, including Guizot, understood that Metternich, the old fox, was trying to balance. Once Britain declined, France would inevitably rise, and Russia would also rush out of the Black Sea. These two neighbors were much more threatening than Britain, which was far away. But Robert Peel did not thank Metternich either, because Metternich demanded that all witnesses be executed immediately instead of imprisoned, which meant that Britain would never be able to clear its suspicion. Although it was not as miserable as becoming the public enemy of Europe, it was definitely not easy for Britain. From then on, all Britain's opponents would make a fuss about this matter. Robert Peel could also order his men to lock up these criminals for interrogation, or torture them into confessing and conspiring to confuse the public. Is it possible? On Britain's own territory, of course it is possible. The latest novels are first published on 69 Shuba. But he didn't know whether the powers present would give him a chance, and whether they would do anything else. In order to avoid more trouble, the best way was to follow Metternich's advice and execute the culprits immediately. However, on the first day of the meeting, Britain lost the initiative. As a fish on the chopping board, Egypt was accepted as one of the 7 countries of the Second London Agreement. Chapter 208, Different Thoughts. A row of gunshots were heard outside the venue, and 9 culprits including Jack Brown were shot. Except for Jack Brown's sudden shout of justice for no reason, no one could understand what the other Egyptians said. Robert Peel was worried about his political future, and Palmerston's days in the cabinet were over. It was likely that he would continue his diplomatic career in places like India, Australia, and the Ottoman Empire. Robert Peel did not have the idea of forcibly detaining criminals such as Jack Brown. He wanted to reverse the situation by forcing them to confess, but what was important was not the truth, but what everyone believed. The diplomats from various countries in the venue were not judges, and they had no obligation to find out the truth. They only made the most favorable choice for their own country based on the situation. Although the British Empire is the most powerful country in the world today, its strength comes from monopoly and plunder. The British used their strong industrial strength to frantically plunder the world's markets and resources. No country is immune, especially those small countries that are unable to protect themselves. Britain's cheap goods have ruthlessly occupied their domestic markets and competed with their own businessmen for interests, which has long made these small countries hate them. Taking this opportunity to boycott Britain and raise tariffs can not only increase fiscal revenue, but also protect the long-term interests of their own businessmen, and retain a possibility of dominating the world. Ali, who should have been arrested together, turned into a hero who caught the culprit under the mediation of Guizot and Nasser Love. Egypt also obtained the qualification to participate in the London Parliament to jointly negotiate the aftermath. France, as Britain's biggest overseas competitor, is very happy to see the British fall, because France is the only country in the world that can compete with the British in industry at this time. After the British suffered this loss, they were more or less boycotted by European countries, and this was the opportunity for France to expand foreign trade. Of course, it is impossible to expect this little dirty water to defeat the British. Britain's cheap goods and the credibility of the Anglo-Saxons are the British's magic weapon for victory. Even when Britain was at war with the Netherlands, it did not forget to repay the Dutch bank. The temptation of cheap industrial products cannot be offset by the resistance of a few people. But at least in the battle between France and Britain for Egypt, the French won this round. Not only did they thwart the British conspiracy, but they also gained the favor of Ali, the ruler of Egypt, and the debts in their hands could firmly bind Egypt, and the future seemed bright. Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Tripoli, and Egypt are using Egypt as a springboard to advance into the Near East. A French North Africa and a Mediterranean empire seem to be just around the corner. Although Nasser Love did not make Britain a world enemy, he must have isolated Britain politically to a certain extent. This makes Russia's future plans to go to sea less hindered, and it is one step closer to Russia's Roman road. Of course, he realized some problems, that is, some people do not want Russia to become too strong. Prime Minister Metternich suddenly stood up and forced the British to end it, which was unexpected for him. Because from the intelligence point of view, the British first tore up the secret agreement with Austria and wanted to drive the Austrians out of Egypt through a trade war. It was also to incite local rebellion forces in an attempt to completely eliminate Austria's influence in Egypt. By the way, Nasser Love was not a professional diplomat. He graduated from the St. Petersburg Military Academy and was the commander of the Siberian Military District before he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs. In other words, before he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he had no diplomatic experience at all. This cannot be blamed on him, because it was Nicholas I who appointed him. Nicholas I loved his army very much, and because of the Decembrists, he hated the civil service group, and almost all the important positions he considered were held by soldiers he considered loyal. Chapter 209, Various Thoughts, 2. Nasser Love became the foreign minister only because he was good at multiple languages and looked gentle, but in fact, he had participated in more than 20 duels in his life and was a very irritable old man. From a soldier's perspective, Nasser Love thought it was feasible for the British to use their strong maritime advantage to unite with the Egyptian rebels to strangle the Egyptian Ali government, and it was also a basic operation to solve other competitors' forces, Russian basic operation. So he couldn't understand Metternich's behavior at all. Obviously, Austria benefited the most from the fight against Britain, so why did it help the British in turn? In fact, Austria's profits in trade with Egypt were very limited, and the profit was made by Hungarian and Italian merchants. Egypt's poverty meant that he could not take out too much real money, and he could only get cotton, and cotton. Lombardy was once an important textile center in Europe, but with the rise of the Atlantic business circle, Lombardy has long lost its former glory. It was also because of the Napoleonic Wars that it once declined. Pest is the center of Hungary's textile industry, but it is far inferior to the big cities in Western Europe, and even the Lombardy region. To put it simply, Austria's productivity is not enough to digest too many raw materials. What's more annoying is that Italian merchants enjoy tax reduction privileges, while Hungarian merchants are almost tax-free. Even if they pay taxes, the bulk of the tax is paid to Hungary rather than Austria. Austria's own industrial products and luxury goods are not sold in Egypt, and the cotton they get in return cannot be consumed by themselves. In many cases, they are sold to merchants in local ports nearby, but unexpectedly ignited the textile industry in Trieste. Metternich was very disgusted with this approach at first, but he soon found that the voices of protest in both places had dropped sharply. So he went from being the biggest opponent of opening up trade to the biggest supporter. Of course, it is limited to doing business with such small countries to prevent the outflow of gold and silver. But now Metternich is facing whether to join this meaningless boycott. Napoleon also did the continental blockade policy, and then he failed. Metternich naturally knew the result of doing so. He knew that Britain had vast colonies all over the world, with almost unlimited markets and raw material production areas. Even if all of Europe boycotted Britain together, it would not be able to shake its foundation. Rather than doing such meaningless things, it is better to stop while you are ahead and put an end to this matter. On the surface, it is helping the British, but in fact it is saving yourself. Ali dared to come in person. This extremely unusual thing, coupled with the inexplicable uprising in Egypt, revealed a perverse trend. Ali came in person, bringing a genuine British spy who has obtained from nowhere to identify the British in London. Think of the last time in Serbia, using battleships and motorboats to carry chariots to steal the house. Metternich would not believe that this matter had nothing to do with France. In fact, the uprising in Egypt had nothing to do with France. France just used the trip to point out a way out for Ali, so that he could have the chance to relive his old dream and be his king. If he lost, the worst thing would be to continue to endure humiliation and maintain the status quo. France did not intend to let Ali come in person, but Ali himself could not suppress his blood. But then again, if a person falls from the peak to the bottom, someone suddenly tells him that he still has a chance to return to the peak. Then this person will definitely grab this life-saving straw at all costs. Ali is no exception. His life is like a gamble. He joined the army, became a businessman, kidnapped the elders in the temple, participated in the expeditionary force, fought against France, challenged the Mamluks, split Egypt, declared war on the suzerain Ottoman Empire, and now. But he made the right bet. The European powers did not want Britain to dominate alone. Now Egypt is in his hands and still has the opportunity to become a world power. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210: A Small Compensation. Metternich brought a letter from the Austrian Emperor Ferdinand I, questioning why the British government unilaterally tore up the agreement. Robert Peel naturally threw the pot on Palmerston, and explained to Metternich the British policy of exchanging food for cotton, which was aimed at helping the poor Egyptian people. Now that Austria has caused misunderstandings, Robert Peel said that he would immediately terminate the plan. In fact, the plan could not be implemented because the riots in Egypt caused heavy losses to British merchants, and the British could not take out extra food to continue selling to Egypt. Robert Peel hated Palmerston in his heart. This guy who only knew how to talk big, talked a lot, but in the end he lost both his wife and his army, with a total loss of nearly £10 million. Moreover, this trade war made the already insufficient British food inventory even more insufficient. At the same time, famine broke out in Ireland and Scotland. Robert Peel considered importing foreign food, which of course was never allowed by domestic grain merchants. In fact, France was still waiting for the fourth round of trade wars. After all, food would be used sooner or later in this era. It is absolutely the right thing to do to fill up the warehouses when you have enough money. France overestimated the economic strength of Britain and underestimated the hatred of the Egyptian people towards Britain. A large part of the reason is that there was no timely and accurate intelligence, and wrong judgments were made based on wrong intelligence. Can the British really not get 10 million tons of food and more money? No, even if the British don't have it, don't the Americans have it? But after 3 rounds of trade wars, British grain has reached a new high since the Napoleonic Wars. What's more terrible is that due to the shortage of transportation capacity, freight rates have risen sharply. Now there is a large-scale anti-British uprising in Egypt, which has made the British completely give up the idea of a trade war. The final result of the matter is that any British company or individual who sells industrial and agricultural goods to Egypt in the next 3 years will need to pay an additional 1% tariff to compensate for the losses of Austrian merchants. In addition, the British side will pay £210,000 to compensate for the recent losses of Austrian merchants. You read it right. £210,000. The compensation that Metternich went to so much trouble to get back is only £210,000. In fact, it was already a lot, because the trade between Austria and Egypt was more of a barter, and the goods were often brought back to Austria by merchants for sale, and the profit from trade with Egypt was not very high. Of the £210,000, 100,000 will be subsidized to Austrian merchants in the form of taxes, 50,000 will be paid to the treasury, and 50,000 will be used to repair infrastructure such as ports and roads. There is also £10,000, of course, not for Prime Minister Metternich alone. He only took £1,000, and the rest was used to pay for the expenses during the negotiations. The last remaining was for the entourage. In addition, Robert Peel also promised that he would not restrict Austria from importing cotton from Egypt, but it could not be resold to other countries, and factories were not allowed to be set up in Egypt. This is very important. The British paid a huge price, and it is impossible to let them get no benefit. In the next few years, no matter how Egypt expands its production capacity, most of the cotton produced will be sold to Britain. At this time, the number of Egyptian exports was really limited: cotton, oranges, dates, figs, onions, marble, and phosphate rock, phosphate, which was mainly used as fertilizer at the time. Moreover, cotton itself accounts for more than 90%. By the way, Egypt also sold laborers at this time, but it is better to say that they are slaves than laborers. Egypt also sold Sudanese laborers abroad. Of course, these so-called laborers are not necessarily voluntary. In order to ensure that Austrian merchants can make enough profits, Franz and Metternich also took great pains. After all, if the shipping industry is empty every time, it cannot develop. One of the main reasons for Venice's independence is that Venice's status as a world port has declined. If you want these people not to make trouble, you always have to fill their stomachs. After all, who wants to make trouble when they are full? Thanks to book friend 202108062327111729 for the reward and the monthly tickets of Fireworks Day Open, book friend 2018027132230855, Dawn76, and Yenling Sanfei, as well as the support of all book friends who read books and vote for recommendations. The latest novel is published first on Liu 9 Shuba. Chapter 211: Palmerston's Journey to India. The day after the banquet, the London conference was held as scheduled. First of all, Palmerston had to resign due to this incident, which even alarmed Queen Victoria. The Queen, who never got involved in politics, also angrily warned Robert Peel when she learned about this. This disgusting and stupid behavior has brought shame to the whole of Britain. You should be responsible for what you have done. In addition, the Queen has always been resentful of Palmerston's indecent behavior. Here we focus on 1839 and the two key words of maid, so Palmerston was thrown directly to India. However, what Queen Victoria didn't know was that Viscount Palmerston would give her a surprise, or a shock, before leaving. Viscount Palmerston planned to meet the Queen before leaving. After all, it is a monarchy, and the ministers must always give face to the Queen. In fact, he was threatened by Robert Peel that if he didn't have a good relationship with the Queen, he would be sent to Oceania to negotiate with the Maori. The indigenous people of New Zealand, the Maori, have always been a more terrifying existence in the eyes of the British. Rather than saying that Palmerston was exiled to India, it is better to say that he chose it himself. Palmerston chose to go to India, first of all, because India is the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. India has been a treasure trove of resources in South Asia since ancient times, with rich products and a large population, and can also provide a huge market for Britain. In such a precious land, there are still city-states that have not been conquered by Britain. Palmerston couldn't understand what these people, the Governor-General of India and the East India Company, were doing. In particular, a state called Sikh has become a thorn in the eyes of the British. Everything started because of the emergence of an extremely outstanding monarch, Ranjit Singh, introduced before, in the Sikh Empire. With his efforts, the Sikh Empire has a total of 14 standing artillery regiments, with 192 artillery pieces and more than 4,500 gunners. If the artillery pieces of forts and fortresses in various parts of the Sikhs are included, the total number of artillery pieces will be as high as 450 to 600. Ranjit Singh's successors also continue the policy of expanding the artillery force, further strengthening the strength of the Sikh army. The Sikh new army was trained by the French and fully met the standards of soldiers during the Napoleonic era. In addition, the Sikh cavalry is the strongest cavalry unit in the entire Indian subcontinent. There is also an army with a strong religious color, called the Immortal Army, which claims to fight to the death and can defeat opponents 5 times its size in hand-to-hand combat. This is the key point, and it will be tested later. Palmerston went to India to consolidate and integrate this colony and let it play its due role, and use all means to prevent it from becoming the second America. The high military expenditure and optimistic attitude required by the second governor of Afghanistan made Palmerston very uneasy. His intuition told him that there must be secrets he didn't know about. Lieutenant General John, who threatened to abandon the city and escape a few months ago, changed his words after receiving several waves of support and said that Kabul could be defended for 10 years. In addition, there were great differences within the parliament regarding the request for continued additional military expenditure. Because the expenditure on this barren land has exceeded any war in the British Empire. At the same time, Palmerston was very supportive of taking over Afghanistan because Afghanistan's location was extremely important. According to the understanding of the king, this is the last barrier to stop Russia from going south to India, and it is the winner of the great game between Britain and Russia. If the Tsar wants to fulfill Peter's will and go south to the Indian Ocean to obtain an ice-free port, Afghanistan is the only way. And Afghanistan is an excellent springboard for attacking India from the south, so where will the Tsar choose to go out to sea after taking Afghanistan? So in order to save India, to stop Russia from going south, and for the British Empire to last for generations, Palmerston must personally confirm the situation in Afghanistan. In the end, Palmerston came to India for selfish reasons. After all, his youngest son suffered a shipwreck after leaving India. The latest novel is first published on the 69th book bar. Please. Chapter 212 Vienna Royal Chartered Insurance Company. After Palmerston left the British cabinet, Metternich breathed a sigh of relief. After all, traditional politicians like Robert Peel were much easier to deal with. In fact, the top leaders of various countries felt the same way. Palmerston's aggressive attitude and Britain's incomparable strength made it difficult to resist. Robert Peel was relatively conservative and less aggressive. He preferred internal reforms to external expansion. For example, he quietly lowered the high protection tax at that time. After the Napoleonic Wars, countries set extremely high protection taxes to prevent the outflow of precious metals, gold and silver. But according to liberal theory, the market's own mechanism is perfect and does not require such high protection taxes. Although some people call Robert Peel the greatest prime minister in British history, second only to Chiu Hong-tang. But in the eyes of his competitors and foreign politicians of the same period, he was an out-and-out weak fool. He proposed a series of seemingly beautiful bills, but none of them were implemented like flowers in the mirror and moon in the water. In fact, it did not help Britain's predicament at the time. After all, he offended everyone in his own party. Then the second greatest prime minister felt too tired, so he quit and left a mess behind. This conservative who believed in liberalism suffered a setback on the Egyptian issue at the beginning of his term, which made the heads of state have a better impression of him. This man is a good speaker. He spoke passionately, rationally and humorously to denounce the evil actions of the Doomsday Ark Society. Even Nasir Love, who hated the British the most, couldn't help but applaud him, but it was useless. What about the worldwide crackdown on the Doomsday Ark Society? This kind of thing has nothing to do with everyone, just listen to it for fun. Anyway, the Doomsday Ark Society originated in Britain, and its territory is either in America across the ocean or in your territory in Britain. Even if we want to crack down on it, you have to go first. As for the Egyptian market, he advocates fair competition in a liberal way. Of course, Egyptian cotton has been booked by Britain in the next few years, and no one except Austria, which has obtained British concessions, can buy cotton in Egypt. In fact, Robert Peel thought too much. There were not many countries in the 7 countries that participated in the formulation of the agreement, or even in the whole of Europe, that had ideas about the Egyptian market. In addition to France and Austria, there were small countries on the Apennine Peninsula, but they did not have the strength to invade Egypt. However, facing France and Austria, British merchants had no competitive advantage at all. Egyptians themselves were very resistant to British goods, and coupled with many reasons such as freight tariffs, British merchants were unwilling to wade into this muddy water. France has always been the first choice for Egyptians to study abroad, and the military and industry like to emulate France. Austrian civilian products conquered the Egyptian market with their extremely low prices and a wide variety of types. What's more, the French can use debt relations to gain more privileges for themselves in Egypt. At the same time, France and Austria both support their own merchants to trade in Egypt in terms of taxation. Large-scale xenophobic incidents occurred in Egypt, which inevitably made some merchants retreat. After all, everyone does business to make money, but it is not worth it to make money and have no life to spend it, not to mention that the profit is not high. In order to relieve the worries of merchants, it is also to pave the way for Austria's future development. Franz was not idle either. He found Madame Sophie, and after bargaining with his biological mother, the Vienna Royal Chartered Insurance Company was established. On the surface, the Vienna Royal Chartered Insurance Company was backed by the Artes Bank, but Madame Sophie was behind the scenes. As for the Royal Charter, it was not a difficult thing for Franz's family. Franz's purpose in establishing this company was certainly not to compete with the people for profits. The main reason was that Austria's insurance industry had just suffered a setback at this time, and overseas trade had just started. If there was no strong insurance company at this time to reduce the risk of Austria's overseas trade, then Austria's newly started overseas trade would stagnate again. However, no insurance company in the UK intended to wade into the muddy waters of Egypt. After all, capital is for profit, so they increased the insurance amount one after another. The latest novel is first published on the 6th-9th book bar. So as for the so-called free trade, British merchants had to move forward in the Egyptian market with great difficulty, and naturally suffered a complete failure. This is of course a story for later. Chapter 213 Mother and Son Talk. In the palace where Madame Sophie lived, a boy passed through the guards at a very fast speed, but the latter turned a blind eye. The boy got into a huge porcelain, as if he was hiding from something. A woman in the palace was lying lazily on a rococo sofa. Franz, stop being cute. I know you are very smart, and your brothers and sisters have long been left behind by you. Just tell me what's going on. Franz poked his head out of the porcelain and smiled shyly. Mother, you know that the Egyptian national uprising has seriously threatened the interests and life and property safety of our merchants in Egypt. Let's talk about business. There are 4 large insurance companies in our country now, namely Trieste Insurance Company, also known as the Austrian-Italian Royal Chartered Generali Insurance Company, Austrian Lloyd Insurance Company, and Moravian Unified Insurance Company. Let's talk about business, Madame Sophie said impatiently. She still knew Franz very well. Franz liked to save the most important things for last. And Franz rarely hesitated to express his opinions on national affairs. What made Franz difficult to talk about must be some trivial matters in life. In the eyes of Madame Sophie, those so-called trivial matters were the serious matters in her eyes. I heard that you planned to let Countess Ranner send Ruskner away, Madame Sophie said. Oh. So it's this matter, there is such a thing. Franz, I want to remind you that your country maid is getting more and more unruly. You'd better take care of her. If you can't discipline her well, I can help you. I'm sorry that I can't control my subordinates, Mother. Madame Sophie has long been accustomed to Franz's strange language with a bit of ancient style. After all, her husband has an even more bizarre language, Abba Abba, and Franz's grandfather seems to speak in this style. If I had known, I shouldn't have let his grandfather take care of the child. Franz continued. What are you going to do with Ruskner? Don't you like the desert in Egypt? I'm thinking of sending her to Egypt and burying her somewhere in the desert. Maybe you'll be more interested in Egypt then, since Austria doesn't have a real overseas colony. Did Ruskner do anything wrong to offend you? Yes, she overstepped her authority. I like this girl very much and even planned to let her be the health worker for my eldest son. This is a blessing that ordinary people can't even ask for, but she doesn't cherish it. Franz felt embarrassed for a moment. Then Madame Sophie said meaningfully. Franz, you are going to be an emperor in the future. An emperor must never lose his mind, let alone put himself in danger easily. Yes, you must understand that you still have 3 younger brothers and a father, and you are not irreplaceable. They also have the right to inherit the Austrian throne. Although they are not the best candidates, as long as your mother is here, this country will not perish. Yes, Mother. But she is innocent and not guilty of the death penalty? Maybe, but I will eliminate anyone who threatens the future of my family. Ruskner, this stupid woman, actually lets you be jealous of others and fight with them, which has exceeded her duty as a maid. The latest novel will be first published on Luigi 9 Shuba. Franz did lack reason to beat Angus at that time, but it was out of anger and consideration to test his own strength, not because of jealousy over a woman. But then again, to outsiders it does look like jealousy. The mother taught her son a lesson, and the son learned his lesson. I helped you clear out the inventory of the garment factory and found a new sales channel, so there is no reward? Franz decided to make a joke and get away with it. After all, if a woman is determined about something, reasoning will basically not work. If she were your mother, then all the reasons you gave would be regarded as quibbling. Madame Sophie frowned. As far as she knew, her eldest son had only two hobbies, one was coloring maps, and the other was being a little sister. The former was a pure waste in Madame Sophie's eyes, but there were candidates for the latter who could be considered. But Madame Sophie quickly understood what her eldest son meant. Okay, then give her another chance. So, let's talk about state affairs next. Chapter 214, The Selection of the Second Young Lady. In fact, it's not that Mrs. Sophie has no choice for the young lady, but as a devout Catholic, it's hard for her to accept her children being with pagans. Before, there was an Egyptian businessman who planned to follow Jacob Ardi's example and send his daughter to the court. For this reason, he also converted to Catholicism, but the Viennese naturally hate Arabs. Who let the Ottomans do the two sieges of Vienna? Bringing the Ottomans into the court always gives people a feeling of letting wolves into the house. Another candidate is an Oriental girl picked up at sea during a routine exercise of the Austrian Navy not long ago. According to the naval soldier who picked up the girl drifted on a wooden board for days and nights, and knocked down two naval soldiers in an extremely weak body. Later, she was awakened by a military doctor, and she knew that the girl regarded the Austrian Navy as a pirate. In fact, the soldiers at that time, especially the sailors, had very poor discipline, just like pirates. The girl's name is Shen Yinglian, a samurai girl from Nagasaki, Izumo province. For some reason, her country is declining. She and her friends wanted to save her country, so they took a Dutch merchant ship to Europe to find a way to save the country. Shen Yinglian could speak Dutch and learned some English from Dutch merchants on the ship. So she could barely communicate with the Austrian soldiers on the warship. The commander-in-chief of the Austrian Navy at this time found her interesting and sent her to Vienna as an exhibit. And the commander-in-chief of the Austrian Navy was Archduke Friedrich Ferdinand, the third son of Archduke Karl. In addition, here is an introduction to Archduke Karl's family. The eldest son, Archduke Albrecht, was a hero on the Italian battlefield and a marshal of the Austrian Empire. The second son, Karl Ferdinand, was the general of Moravia and Silesia, the lieutenant general of the Austrian Empire, and the only mediocre person in the family. The third son, Archduke Friedrich Ferdinand, was the commander-in-chief of the Austrian Navy and the initiator of the Austrian naval reform. The fourth son, Archduke William Karl, was an Austrian marshal, served as the chief of the Army General Staff, a genius in military theory, liked to write books, was born with epilepsy, and had a proud student, Marshal Conrad. Of course, Shen Yinglian didn't know that she was being treated as an animal in a circus. She just thought that Austrians liked this magical technology and admired Japanese culture. Archduke Friedrich Ferdinand did this for two reasons. The first and final reason was that Shen Yinglian actually claimed that she was going to the Ottoman Empire with her friends to learn advanced technology. This made Archduke Friedrich Ferdinand a little bit overwhelmed. He was not surprised that Orientals went anywhere to learn advanced technology, but as an Austrian royal family, he couldn't accept that they were going to the Ottoman Empire. So Archduke Friedrich Ferdinand planned to let this country bumpkin see the prosperity of Vienna. At that time, Vienna was second only to Paris on the European continent, and Berlin was not even as prosperous as Prague. Another reason was that Archduke Friedrich Ferdinand had seen similar technology in the court, and perhaps the crown prince would like it. With a previous experience of Archduke Karl, several of his descendants paid attention to their relationship with the emperor. Except for the eldest son Albrecht. Albrecht was the most opposed to his father, but he was the most like Archduke Karl. Fortunately, Franz paid great attention to his relationship with Albrecht, which made the relationship between the two less awkward. But Mrs. Sophie naturally could not trust Shen Yinglian, an Oriental person of unknown origin. She could not allow any unsafe factors to approach her children. And Mrs. Sophie was a devout Catholic, and Shen Yinglian was an excellent candidate for a missionary in her eyes. She simply sent Shen Yinglian to the monastery and asked Sister Teresa to brainwash her, oh no, baptize her. As for why Archbishop Rauscher of Vienna was not allowed to go? Because he himself was the biggest question of Catholicism. Imagine a fat man weighing 250 kilograms, wearing clothes made of gold and silver threads, with 10 luxurious rings on his hands, and holding a pure gold scepter in his hand. Poor Shen Yinglian, As the first woman in Japan to open her eyes to the world, risked her life and came to Europe from afar, but was sent to a monastery, and started her career as a charlatan. Of course, compared with her companions, Shen Yinglian's luck is good. Her companions were rescued by a passing British businessman and arrived at their destination, Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. The latest novels are first published on 69 Shuba. Then they appeared in the Ottoman slave market. But the Japanese did not stop, and more Japanese were trying, although most of them could not reach their final destination. Nakatsuka Risa, Bando Shoji, and Shinohara Hisao successfully arrived in the Netherlands, where they studied and lived for a year and successfully made a sum of money. Through their study of European history, they found that France was more worthy of their study. So they embarked on the road to France. Chapter 215 Mother and Son's Greed. You want so much money to open an insurance company? Is this kind of money-making business really that profitable? Can you do some business like your mother? Don't spend all your time thinking about how to cheat people. Mrs. Sophie's blood pressure would rise when she saw Franz and did something she didn't quite understand. Then she began to question Franz all the way about what his plan was. Insurance is not a scam. Insurance should be considered a booster and stabilizer of the economy. Many overseas merchants have their entire fortune on ships. If their fortune is not guaranteed, what can they use to compete with merchants from other countries? Then let the rich go. What business can they do without money? Can't our country find a few people who can take the risk of ships? Mother, meat eaters are vulgar and cannot plan for the long term. Mrs. Sophie analyzed for a while. You are so far-sighted, why don't you open an ocean-going company yourself? Mom will give you a share, and we will split the profits 50-50. Franz scratched his head. Mother, this is competing with the people for profits, which is not allowed. If the royal family opens companies everywhere to compete with merchants for profits, what will happen to those merchants who originally engaged in overseas trade? Didn't you say that they have neither vision nor strength? Our family has money and people. Don't you always like to say that the fittest survive? As for why Madame Sophie knew about the survival of the fittest, when Franz was young, Madame Sophie would occasionally come to fulfill her mother's duties and coax Franz to sleep, but all the stories she told were horror stories. Later, Franz couldn't sleep, so he had to tell Madame Sophie stories. But the result of doing so is that businessmen won't make money, and then a large number of workers will lose their jobs and become homeless. They may join the rebels and start riots at certain times, which will lead to political instability. That's easy. You make money from your company, so you can train more soldiers and increase the number of gendarmes. It turns out that Madame Sophie's thoughts have long formed a closed loop, and can achieve logical self-consistency to a certain extent. No wonder she is so fearless. Mother, you will not benefit the whole country except for increasing unnecessary social expenditures. You can't increase social wealth, and you can only kill your own people, but if you hand over all these businesses to merchants, they can't increase social wealth, and they may also cause waste. There are 3,632 registered merchant ships in the country, of which there are 210 ocean-going cargo ships of more than 1,000 tons. Of the 500 ships you hired to smuggle grain from Egypt, 1/5 belong to the Tefi family, 1/5 belong to the Sina family, 2/5 belong to the Austrian Royal Navy, and the remaining 100 ships belong to 23 companies. At this time, Austria did not have many large tonnage ships that could sail long distances, and many small companies only had 1-2 ships that met the standards. Too many scattered resources will indeed cause waste of resources. However, Mrs. Sophie actually knew the data in such detail, it seems that she came prepared. Mother, please tell me what you want. Mom wants to open a shipping company, but now we don't have any ships, capital, or personnel. But I promise to be the first client of your insurance company. And then we can split the spoils 50-50. How about that, Mother? You are really a genius. The future of Austria is in your hands. I will go hunting with my father now, then 40-60 is fine. Mother, why do you need so much money? Our country is poor, and everything doesn't require money, just like you eat, sleep, and take extra classes all day long. Franz turned and left. The latest novels are first published on the 69th book bar. Don't think I don't know that you used my name last time to let the Bohemian Solidarity Bank secretly sell bonds in Paris and Berlin. You now have at least 100 million guilders in your hands. I am worried about so much money, so I advise you to do some real business. I will give you a maximum profit of 5%, and you have to attend all occasions. Deal. Chapter 216 Negotiations continue. London, Westminster Palace. "We must send troops to protect the safety of our citizens," Robert Peel shouted loudly, as if he could convince the other party. Obviously, he had no talent as a diplomat. The Prime Minister, who came from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, was used to speeches that no one refuted. But he was not ready for this kind of negotiation that could be interrupted at any time. Mr. Robert Peel, isn't this tragedy enough? Are you going to let more people die? Nasrullah responded tit for tat. Anyway, Russia has no interests in Egypt, so it would be better if all countries could not send troops. Egypt could be used to keep the British hanging. But if troops were sent to participate in the division of Egypt, it would be very disadvantageous for Russia, so he strongly opposed sending troops to Egypt. To die? My British Empire army is invincible. The lives and property of our citizens are threatened. Do you want my British Empire to sit idly by? Our compatriots are not beasts. Robert Peel was not to be outdone. Who are you calling a beast? How could you die in the desert if you didn't invade others? The invincible British army actually had to pay tolls to the natives. I think this is the most shameless thing in the world, Nasrullah retorted. Grey beasts did not only exist during World War I, the treatment of Russian soldiers was extremely poor. This was a consensus in Europe. Russian soldiers could fight for a long time with extremely low supplies. Officers could beat and scold soldiers at will, and even execute them without punishment. The equipment of the Russian army was extremely scarce and backward. We are going to trade legally. Count Nasrullah, please pay attention to your words. You are offending a gentleman. Bullshit. The legal morality you British people talk about is bullshit. You violated the trade law first, and then instigated the Mamluks to massacre competitors. How dare you call yourself a gentleman? Do you want to duel? Pirate. Although Nasrullah looks gentle and wears a pair of glasses, he is actually a thorough soldier, but the Prussian prince did not get the dates, so he refused to pay. But what a coincidence, behind this Austrian Chamber of Commerce were Count Kolarov, Austrian finance minister, and Archduke John. So the unfortunate prince had to pay obediently. At this time, Austria was much stronger than Prussia, at least in the eyes of people at that time, and Prussia's army was less than half of Austria's. So the prince put all the blame on the Egyptians, and Lord Sever's other task was to collect debts for the prince. After all, Lord Sever didn't want to try the feeling of being beaten by the prince with a cane, so he could only bite the bullet and prepare to find a good time to bring it up. However, due to the previous accident, the responsibility was pushed to the Doomsday Ark by the Egyptians and the British. He couldn't ask this illusory cult for money. So he set his sights on the British. After all, the British were rich and powerful, and they shouldn't mind compensating Prussia for its losses of £1,000. The latest novel is published first on Liu 9 Shuba. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217. The Middleman is a bad guy. Also here to join in the fun was the Grand Vizier Ferzak of the Ottoman Empire. But unlike Lord Sewell, who was very calm and even had the leisure to eat a fruit platter, he was hiding in a corner praying, hoping that no more bad luck would happen to him. Ferzak's worries were not unreasonable. After all, people always pick on the weak. Just like the last time Serbia took the initiative to attack Austria, but in the end it was the Ottomans who ceded land and paid compensation. After returning home, he became the target of joint attacks by conservatives and reformists. The reformists felt that the treaty he signed was humiliating to the country, and the conservatives felt that he must have accepted a large amount of bribes and sold out the interests of the country without bringing everyone with him. He ate alone. The assassination attempts against him never stopped, and even his dog was poisoned to death. Even the British and Russians hoped that Ferzak would disappear from the world, but why was he still as stable as an old dog in the position of Grand Vizier? Because he brought back loans from the French and trade agreements from the Austrians. The capital injection from the French gave the Ottoman economy new vitality. Trade with the Austrians not only provided cheap food and industrial products, but also a brand new market. The commodities exported by the Ottomans to Austria were mainly high-grade leather, cotton, carpets, tobacco, gemstones, and minerals. Ottoman merchants made money by selling these high-value-added commodities, and the Austrians were also excited that they could find a new market. At this time, The Ottomans felt that everything from the west was good, so Austria's trade with the Ottomans was very smooth. And with the convenience of the Danube River, the cost could be further reduced. And the tumor that had always been living in the Ottoman Empire, Bosnia and Herzegovina, was thrown away. As a black hole of the empire's tax revenue, every sultan and grand vizier had a headache about it. Today, this tumor was actually removed, and with the French loan and the new market of Austria, the entire Ottoman economy was boosted. In addition, Austria and France prepared a large amount of bribes for Ferzak to bring to the Sultan. Usually, the Grand Vizier would embezzle part of it, but Ferzak even filled part of it in to save his life. The Ottoman Sultan naturally wanted to protect such a capable and loyal minister. After all, who would get the money after Ferzak died, and who would take the blame for the Sultan? Would the Sultan bear it himself? Unlike the thriving Ottoman Empire, Serbia, as a middleman, suffered a lot. Milos did not take Mihailo's proposal and sent people to negotiate with Austria and Russia separately, trying to get the maximum benefits as much as possible. However, Milos's two-facedness did not make him the double champion that the two countries were vying for. Instead, he was punished by Russia and Austria successively. After the construction, Russia asked Serbia to repay the money immediately, and Serbia could only use land and mines to repay the debt. Austria directly skipped Serbia as a middleman and started trading directly with the Ottoman Empire. In order to reduce costs, the Ottoman Empire frantically lowered Serbia's tariffs. If the 2.5% tariff almost collapsed Egypt's Ali government, then Serbia's 1% tariff now makes Milos desperate. Even this 1% tariff, the Ottomans are unwilling to pay. The Ottomans did not dare to fight the Russians and the Austrians, but they really did not take Serbia seriously. The situations faced by Milos and Ali were different. There were indeed rebels in Serbia, and they were powerful and funded by foreign countries. In addition, Serbia was in ruins after the war, and people were determined. Who would want to fight a civil war? Therefore, the Serbian rebels were entrenched in the mountains, and Milos's regular army could not wipe them out. But as the situation continued to deteriorate, the number of rebels continued to increase. The rebel forces began to stir, and they were ready to come out of the mountains and compete with Milos for the world. Just when Milos was exhausted from trying his best to deal with it, he remembered the neutral policy advocated by Miha. If he could be neutral earlier, he could quickly recover by acting as a middleman and stabilize the domestic situation as soon as possible. Milos first took advantage of the war between Austria and Serbia to kill the pro-Russian faction, then used the Russians in the name of stabilizing the situation to kill the pro-Austrian faction, and then negotiated with both countries at the same time in the hope of provoking hatred between the two countries in order to consolidate his position. But at this time, Russia and Austria were in a honeymoon period, and he underestimated the intelligence capabilities of Russia and Austria. Archduke Karl secretly released a group of Serbian prisoners of war, and Milos was about to swallow the bitter fruit he had sown. The latest novel is first published on 69 Shuba. Chapter 218 I have 20,000 lobster soldiers, can you stop them? Metternich looked at the farce in front of him and remained silent. To be honest, Lord Metternich looked down on these juniors because they did not even have the most basic qualities. They were not principled and only talked about interests. The Russians had exposed themselves too much, while the British seemed to only care about immediate interests. It seemed that everything was developing in a direction that was beneficial to Austria, but Metternich was not naive enough to think that the two world powers would continue to be at odds. It was obviously not in Austria's interests to let the British station troops in Egypt. But facing the British who were determined to win, it was impossible to settle the matter peacefully. He thought it would be better to wait and see. Sure enough, Guizot could not sit still. Everyone, stop for a moment. I think we should still listen to the opinions of the victims. In fact, the French supported the deployment of troops by multiple countries to Egypt to protect their citizens, because France also had a backup plan similar to the British. These soldiers could support the pro-French forces to come to power after Ali's fall. Even if Ali's son could successfully succeed to the throne, he would have to continue the debt between Egypt and France. Otherwise, France could use this as an excuse to attack Egypt and then support a puppet to come to power. It is in France's interest to station troops in Egypt. If they advance, they can control Egypt. If they retreat, they can prevent other countries from controlling Egypt. Moreover, Guizot believed that the only opponent of France was the British. The Austrians would only seek benefits for a little bit of petty gains. But now France is not fully prepared. At this time, France's national strength has not recovered. The colonial rebellion continues, mainly in Algeria, and the revolutionaries are still waiting for an opportunity. Sending a large number of troops will inevitably consume France's national strength. Sending fewer troops will not have the desired effect. Therefore, Guizot did not agree to send troops to Egypt at this time. But obviously he was more strategic than Nasrallah and let the Egyptians be the shield. I oppose any country to station troops in my country. The Egyptian government has the ability to maintain the stability of the country. Ali's words were obviously not convincing, but his attitude had shown that he wanted to regain his power and would not allow anyone to interfere. Robert Peel laughed angrily. The Egyptian government had the ability to control the situation, so what was going on with this uprising? But in fact, Ali sent troops at the first time to protect the foreign friends except the British. Although Ali wanted to kill all the Europeans, he was not crazy. Why do you make us believe that the Egyptian government is capable? Egypt still has 100,000 troops, 100,000. But according to the agreement, Egypt can only maintain 18,000 soldiers. Ali Pasha, you are blatantly violating the London Agreement. Are you trying to challenge the international order? This is not to protect friends from all countries, measure Egypt's military strength, and win the favor of other countries. Ali threw the pot back again. Robert Peel wanted to take advantage of the issue, but found that the pot was still on him. He couldn't help but curse in his heart, damn Doomsday Ark society. In fact, all countries knew clearly that Ali had retained a large number of troops, but there was no need to pursue this matter. After all, this matter did not affect the interests of their own countries, and the British believed that these troops were a guarantee to prevent France from interfering in Egypt, and they did not raise it. Now these 100,000 Egyptian troops have become Ali's bargaining chips, which made Robert Peel regret it. Ali wanted to use this last 100,000 troops to prevent the great powers from requesting garrison troops. The latest novel is published on the 69th Book Forum. But can it really be achieved? The 100,000 Egyptian troops are nothing in the eyes of the British. Back then, 2,000 lobster soldiers could chase and kill 70,000 Egyptian troops. Can the 100,000 Egyptian troops today stop the British? Thanks to the book friend Shanshaobu Wuxiang Shifengdao for the reward in the book Friends 201902021017000627, Ge Uangsu, book Friends 2020342124333727, 201912062009293110, Siberian Wolf King Li Ergao for the monthly tickets and the support of all book friends. Chapter 219 Limited Garrison. Egypt's 100,000-man army is indeed not enough, but Guizot can. Because Nasrallah and Ali have already stood up to express their opposition, stationing troops in Egypt has no practical benefits for Austria, which only wants to make money, and there is no reason to stand on the side of Britain. The remaining Ferzak and Lord Sewell are just here to make soy sauce. At least that's what Guizot thinks. I also agree with Count Nasrallah. Since Ali Pasha said that he has the ability to protect the lives and property of people from all countries, we should believe him and should not send troops into a free country. Don't you think so? Grand Vizier, at this time, Ferzak's heart was full of 10,000 alpacas. After hiding for so long, he was still discovered, but France is now the most important ally, creditor, of the Ottoman Empire and cannot give it a chance. But in order to resist the powerful Russia, the Ottoman Empire cannot afford to offend Britain, its ally. Ferzak racked his brains to find a way to have the best of both worlds, but he couldn't think of it. So he decided to let himself go and said it based on his personal disgust for Egypt and Ali. Egypt is a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire, and Egypt's military strength is limited. Merchants from various countries are of course protected by their own armies, so they feel more secure. Robert Peel couldn't help but feel relieved when he heard this. It seems that the hard work over the years has not been in vain, and the Ottoman Empire still has its heart towards Britain. If there's a chance, we should support this sick man of West Asia more. After all, the legacy of the Near East can only belong to the British Empire. Unlike Robert Peel, who was overjoyed, Guizot's face became more and more ugly. It seems that the strength is not enough. No matter how much help and support, in the end, we can only raise an ungrateful person. Guizot has plenty of ways to deal with the ungrateful Ottoman. At this moment, Ferzak changed the subject. But Egypt is under the rule of Ali Pasha after all. Ali Pasha feels that he has the ability to provide protection for all friendly countries, and he has an army of 100,000. Moreover, sending too many troops is a waste of money and labor, and it is easy to disturb the people. It is better for each country to limit the number of garrisons. Frontenac specifically emphasized a number of 100,000 inches to remind all countries that the size of the Egyptian army is overstaffed. After all, the larger the size of Egypt's army, the more disadvantageous it is for the Ottoman Empire. Tripoli and Tunisia are nominally territories of the Ottoman Empire, and they will pay tribute to the Sultan every year, and Egypt is like a sharp knife that separates these two pieces of land from the Ottoman mainland. As for why the limit on the size of the garrison was proposed, it was naturally to please Guizot. Because France at this time was also something the Ottoman Empire could not afford to defend. After all, France was the big moneymaker of the Ottoman Empire. Without the money of the French, the Ottoman Empire would not have money to develop industry, let alone maintain stability. Of course, Frontenac did not dare to offend the British. As mentioned earlier, the Ottoman Empire still relied on the British to fight against the Russians. After all, according to historical experience, the Russo-Turkish War is about to start again. And what the Russians want is what the Ottomans cannot give. So the Ottomans can only do everything possible to find allies to resist possible future wars. Frontenac proposed to limit the size of the garrison, which Robert Peel never expected. So he cursed in his heart. "This damn Turk, a scumbag, curse you to be eaten by the bear." Although he was angry, the major policy of supporting the Ottoman Empire to prevent Russia from gaining access to the sea could not be changed. Moreover, with the British military strength, only 20,000 people were enough to defeat the so-called 100,000 Egyptian army. Another point is that due to the climate and terrain of Egypt, the Egyptian population is mainly distributed along the Nile River and the Mediterranean coast. The latest novel is first published in 69 Shuba. Britain does not need to disperse its troops too much to control the main densely populated areas of Egypt. Guizot understood Frontenac's approach. After all, not long ago, Guizot was a British licker and was called a traitor by the French. Limiting the number of troops stationed was a two birds with one stone move. It could not only consume the British national strength, but also provide a reason for France to send troops into Egypt. When France's national strength recovered and Britain declined, it would be the time for France to march into Egypt in a big way. Chapter 220 Prophecy. Metternich wanted to applaud the unremarkable Grand Vizier in front of him. This man was quite like his old style. He actually found a ray of hope in this desperate situation. There were rumors that the Ottoman Empire was vigorously industrializing and training new troops. Could this person be the real mastermind behind it? Metternich thought about it and decided not to let the Ottoman Empire make a comeback. In the Austrian mind, their biggest enemy has never been Britain or Russia but the Ottoman Empire and Prussia. After that, a new round of quarrels began over the number of garrisons. Finally, at the insistence of Robert Peel, it was stipulated that each country, Ottoman Empire, Britain, France, Russia, Austria, Prussia, could station a maximum of 10,000 troops in Egypt. This number can be said to be the most ideal number in Guizot's mind. 10,000 troops can consume the national strength of Britain, but cannot pose a sufficient threat to Ali's government. Ali hoped for 2,000, because he really didn't know how incompetent his men were. When he heard that his 70,000 troops in Syria were driven out of the city by a British regiment, he didn't believe it. Until he saw the demoralized remnants of the defeated army, he sat on his throne in despair. He raised his hand several times, and then put it down again. He could not make up his mind because he was unwilling to give up. Ali, who once sat in the palace, was like a walking corpse, because he knew that he had become a puppet of the British and French, waiting for the British and French to suck his flesh and blood and tear his body apart, but he was powerless to change this result. One day a mysterious man came to his palace, said those words to him, and told him that he and his descendants still had a chance. Everything happened as the prophet predicted, and everything came so fast that Ali was not ready. But Ali knew that a crack had been opened in the dark clouds covering the sky. Originally, Ali could only borrow money to survive, drinking poison to quench thirst, and constantly cycled in the deteriorating economic situation and more loans until the whole country perished. Now Egypt has the hope of rising again. Soon the great powers will abolish the restrictions on Egypt's military power in order to limit the power of the British. This is just a first step. Next, he would use the money earned from the tripartite trade, using the cotton produced in the future to exchange for food with the British, and then use this food to exchange for money with European countries, to gradually repay the loan and start industrialization again. Then he would continue to trade, train a new army and wait for a suitable opportunity to return to the arena. Of course, he still needed to do one more thing for this. Everyone, Egypt's military strength is limited, and the domestic rebels hiding in the desert hills are difficult to eliminate for a while. At the same time, the people in the middle and lower reaches of the Nile River are not yet civilized. If merchants and soldiers from various countries enter the middle and lower reaches of the Nile River, Egypt will find it difficult to guarantee the safety of people from various countries. Ali's meaning was very clear, that is, not allowing the great powers to enter Egypt's hinterland. But it was mentioned before that Egypt is different from other countries. Its population resources are mainly distributed along the Mediterranean coast and the Nile River. The middle and lower reaches of the Nile River, as well as the Sudan region, are all farmlands or uncivilized barren lands, which are really unattractive to the great powers such as Britain and France that need to export goods. The other four countries had no objection because there was almost no interest involved. Metternich guessed that Ali must have hidden something in the middle and lower reaches of the Nile River. But he didn't care about this. It would be better to say that he hoped that Ali could hide something powerful to deal with Britain and France. Then the powers reached an agreement that each country could send troops to Egypt, but they needed to lease land from Egypt and pay rent. At the same time, the troops of each country were not allowed to leave the lease unless in an emergency. Any European who went deep into the middle and lower reaches of the Nile River would not be protected by the Egyptian government and would bear the consequences at his own risk. Ali sat on the chair and let out a long breath, and then looked at the note left by the Prophet. The latest novel is published on the 69th book bar. If you have the will, you will succeed. If you burn your boats, the 120 kin passes will eventually belong to Chu. If you work hard, God will not let you down. If you sleep on firewood and taste gall, you can swallow Wu with 3,000 you soldiers. Isn't the first sentence a portrayal of Ali's first half of his life? Is the second sentence his future? Ali couldn't help but burst into tears. Chapter 221 Weird. Son, I'm worried about you holding so much money. I'll save it all for you and give it to you when you grow up. Mother, when will I grow up? Madame Sophie was speechless for a moment, because she was thinking about how to pay the money back later. Franz naturally knew what she was thinking. Mother, in your heart I will always be a child who never grows up, right? Madame Sophie subconsciously answered yes. Franz ran away. There were some things that Madame Sophie hadn't had time to say, but after all, Franz was still young and it seemed a little early for such things, so Madame Sophie didn't care. Madame Sophie went to Bavaria not long ago to visit her sister Ludovica, who is obviously not living a happy life. Madame Ludovica did not marry the King or the Grand Duke of Austria like her sisters. Her husband had neither a prominent noble title nor a poor country bumpkin. The Queen of Saxony once said bluntly, "Your manor is not as big as my horse farm." Ludovica's misfortune was not only due to poverty, but also because her husband, a duke who had a special liking for circuses, did not even love her at all. Although Ludovica gave birth to 10 children for Duke Maximilian Joseph, he would still bring his mistresses and illegitimate children home to entertain and dine with him. This was undoubtedly a humiliation in Ludovica's eyes. But her father had passed away, and her half-brother obviously did not care about her situation. She could only complain to her sisters, but the Queen of Prussia, as the eldest sister, was very bullish and asked her to be patient and take things as they came. Her fourth sister, the Queen of Saxony, laughed at her stupidity and poverty. Madame Sophie, whose home was closest to hers, became the main target of her complaints. Madame Sophie gave her 2 suggestions. 1. Divorce him. 2. Kill him. Ludovica was obviously not as strong as Madame Sophie. Although she was unwilling in her heart, she remained as hating. However, Duke Maximilian Joseph was still very afraid of Madame Sophie. Although Madame Sophie was only a Grand Duchess, the Grand Duke had already handed all the power to her. Especially after Madame Sophie gave birth to her eldest son, her position in the Habsburg court became more stable. Every time Madame Sophie returned to Bavaria to visit her relatives, even King Ludwig I, as the king and patriarch, had to go out of the city to greet her. Not to mention Duke Maximilian Joseph, this Bavarian no-name Grand Duke obviously did not have the capital to challenge Madame Sophie. But fortunately, the Grand Duke had no self-esteem at all. Seeing that he would suffer a loss, he simply hid or went out to play every time Madame Sophie came, and came back after Madame Sophie left. Madame Ludovica always regarded Madame Sophie as an idol and savior, but because of her soft temper and soft ears, she could not be Madame Sophie. Perhaps it was because of her unfortunate marriage that Madame Ludovica hoped that her daughters could have royal marriages. Madame Sophie happened to have a bunch of sons, and the two hit it off. Princess Helen, nicknamed Nana, the eldest daughter of Lady Ludovica, was gentle, considerate and polite, which met Lady Sophie's requirements. The latest novel was first published on the 69th Book Forum. Lady Sophie was a woman with a strong desire for power, and she did not want her future daughter-in-law to take away her son's rights. At this time, the Queen of Austria had considerable power, but this power was mainly reflected in the fact that she could refute the emperor. As for the little girl Elizabeth, nicknamed Sissy, running around, she happened to marry her silly third son Ludwig. Ludwig was not good at speaking, his brain was not bright, and he had a little autistic tendency. It was rare to see him playing so happily with others. Perhaps it was Sissy's innocence and vitality that touched him. In any case, at least letting these two children be together was a wish of her sister. As for Nana and her eldest son, it all depends on fate. After all, her three sons are very strange, and the strangest one is the eldest son Franz. Do you think he is stupid? This kid has been regarded as the future of the empire by the old emperor and the archbishop since he was a child. He can even debate with the smartest person in the empire, Prime Minister Metternich. Do you think he is smart? He is bullied by a mate all day and has to cook for himself. He has never won a debate with his stupid father. He likes to punch and kick a wooden board when he has nothing to do. Mrs. Sophie thought about it and decided not to tell Franz that the wooden board he hit was made of iron birch. Chapter 222. Want a good personality. Iron birch is the hardest wood in the world, twice as hard as ordinary steel. It can be cut by a knife or stabbed by a sword. It cannot be penetrated by small caliber firearms, and large caliber rifles may not be able to penetrate it either. Franz did not break his hand, so he can be considered a Superman in a sense. Madame Sophie was not idle when she arrived in Bavaria. She naturally promoted her products. I don't know where the energy came from, but Madame Sophie suddenly became very interested in making money. However, Madame Sophie also knew that it would be more appropriate to ask the nobles in the Bavarian court to promote her cosmetics, underwear, high-end toothpaste, and new candies, lollipops. As for her sister, she was naturally given as a gift. Of course, Madame Sophie, who was rich at this time, would not care about this little thing. Cosmetics and new underwear are rare items that are hard to come by for a marginal rural noble like Ludovica. Madame Ludovica herself is a beauty, but doing housework in an unfortunate marriage made her anxious about her appearance. The gifts brought by Madame Sophie made her very happy. Especially the new underwear, which was a genius design. Then she couldn't help but think of the first few years of Madame Sophie's marriage, when she always complained about her husband's stupidity and dullness. Isn't this a good understanding of women? He is so careful and can design such a genius invention. My sister's requirements are really too high. Madame Ludovica couldn't help thinking so. Anyway, she felt that Madame Sophie, who would rather strangle herself to death than wear a shaping garment, would never come up with such a design. Only her brother-in-law, who was known as the second idiot in Austria, could come up with such a design. The first idiot is of course His Majesty the Emperor himself. As for lollipops, children like them, but they may cause tooth decay. However, the thoughtful Madame Sophie also gave toothpaste. This toothpaste in a metal hose is much better than tooth powder. There were metal hoses in early toothpaste in this era, but no one put toothpaste in a metal hose. After Franz's simple improvement, he added some necessary ingredients and was the first to put toothpaste in a metal hose. Thus, the first modern toothpaste was born, and thus saved Princess Sissy's yellow teeth. After all, Princess Sissy could use the tooth powder as an excuse that it was too difficult to use, but now she could only brush her teeth with her sister. Soon Ludovica discovered a new characteristic of this family: they were unwilling to admit defeat and had a tendency to be masochistic. Maximilian, the second son of Madame Sophie, played chess with Princess Nana, and he lost 10 games in a row and hit his head hard. Second Ludwig, the third son of Madame Sophie, followed Princess Sissy around the yard, and was dragged into the ditch several times and never tired of it. Nana was very docile, but she was particularly serious about chess because she was often shamelessly asked by Duke Maximilian Joseph, hereafter referred to as Maxi, to distinguish him from Franz's second brother, to give her a handicap. Sissy, on the other hand, learned to run before she learned to speak. She had known all the twists and turns in the manner over the years. Ludwig failed so badly, it must be this girl who did something bad. On the other hand, My sister's 2 children are like my sister in that they are not willing to admit defeat and are strong-willed. This ability to find joy in adversity must have been inherited from my brother-in-law. This is a good character. I must marry my daughter to him, and I must not let her suffer like me. Mrs. Ludovica thought so. I just don't know how my sister's eldest son is. I heard from the priests in the church that Archbishop Rauscher almost made Franz a saint. Ludovica thought so, but she also knew that the archbishop couldn't control his mouth when he drank. What's more, if my sister gave birth to a saint with her personality, I'm afraid he would have to be dragged out to sell it every day. By the way, Maxie seemed to have said that Mrs. Sophie was an annoying Greater German. Ludovica didn't know what the Greater German was, but she knew that this group of people didn't want to restore the Holy Roman Empire, but planned to force Protestants and Catholics, sweet parties and salty parties together. I heard that the Protestants in the north pickle sauerkraut without adding sugar. This is simply terrible, Mrs. Ludovica said to herself. The latest novels are first published in 69 Schuba. Chapter 223 Second London Agreement. Austrian Prime Minister Metternich was the greatest traitor in the 19th century. During his 40 years in power, he used his cunning diplomatic tactics to command the whole of Europe and suppress the Democratic Party. In the first half of the 19th century, the corruption on the European continent was mostly caused by this man. London, Westminster Palace. The fierce quarrel continued, and the countries could not reach an agreement on the compensation issue. Because Britain had suffered a loss in the issue of garrison before, Robert Peel planned to deny the promised compensation. After all, there was no rule that a gentleman could not default on his debt. However, Robert Peel's denial skills were much worse. He wanted Egypt to pay money to compensate for the losses of European countries. Now not only Egypt refused to do it, but also European countries refused to do it. Egypt had promised to allow European troops to enter the Mediterranean coast, and there was no reason to continue to make concessions. The European powers that came for the compensation felt that Egypt could not afford the money at all, and would definitely continue to make empty promises. The powers felt that Britain was also responsible, and Robert Peel pushed the blame on the Ark of Doomsday. Ali took advantage of the situation and immediately put the blame on the Mamluks. The powers that were waiting for compensation happily were not happy. The most furious was not France, which suffered heavy losses, nor Austria, which was the closest, nor Russia, which had been against the British at the meeting, but Lord Sever of Prussia, who stood up angrily. If you British had not blocked the port, our goods, dates, would have been shipped and left long ago. 3 of our royal family members disappeared in Egypt, and their bodies have not been found yet. This is all your fault. Lord Sever's sudden attack made everyone in the meeting room a little confused for a while. Guizot and Nasrlov looked at Prince Metternich at the same time, and Metternich was also confused at this time. Prussia and Egypt are 2 completely unrelated places. If you want to know why Prussia jumped out, there must be someone behind the scenes instructing it. The only one who can instruct Prussia in this meeting is Austria, the chairman of the German Confederation. Robert Peel was also confused. According to Prince Metternich's style of doing things, he should have been smoothing things over. Why did Prussia suddenly come forward? Could it be that Austria was the mastermind behind this? Palmerston and the Cambridge organization were naturally not idle. Although there was no direct evidence, a large number of clues were interrupted in Austria. How could such a behavior of trying to cover up the truth be hidden from the experienced Palmerston? This was certainly not done by Franz at the behest of Yeladonia and her men. Even if they wanted to do it, they did not have the strength. This was certainly done by the Austrian secret police. In terms of the ability to abuse power and alert the enemy, they are simply the best in Europe, and Lord Salmon deserves the title. Metternich was originally best at staying out of the matter, mediating on the surface, and actually making profits for his country. But after being mixed up by Lord Sewell, he became the first bird to come forward. Mr. Robert Peel, listen to my explanation. Metternich really wanted to say this, but he was Metternich after all. An expert in manipulating the political situation. I think Britain is a world power after all, and it is necessary to take on the responsibilities of a great power. In any case, the Ark of Doomsday originated from Britain, and it was the priests of the Church of England who instigated this unrest. Britain must take on this responsibility, otherwise, how can it comfort its European compatriots who died in this unrest? Just like Egypt has made concessions and allowed troops from various countries to be stationed, Nasrlov nodded in approval, worthy of being a brother country. Guizot smiled. The old ginger is indeed shrewd. Seizing the 3 points that the Ark of Doomsday originated from Britain, the priests of the Church of England who instigated the rebellion, and the slaughter of European compatriots, the British either paid money to keep the peace, or everyone was willing to clear the name of the British. For Jack continued to hide in the corner and silently chanted, "Don't see me, don't see me." He didn't want to continue to offend the British or the French. In his heart, let alone asking for compensation, he would be thankful as long as he didn't have to pay money. It would be bad if it was discovered that Egypt was also a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire, like the last time in St. Petersburg. But at the same time, all the diplomats in the conference hall identified Metternich as the mastermind behind the scenes. But this time Robert Peel did not do that. After all, 4 of the 5 major powers had already stood on one side, and the overall situation had been decided. Britain had no reason to continue to offend the Ottoman Empire. The bear had to pass through the Bosphorus Strait to break out of the Black Sea. What's more, public opinion is still a terrible thing. The Americans will definitely use this opportunity to vigorously discredit the British to prevent the British from entering America. If the European continental powers get involved again, Britain's authority and image in the world will inevitably be greatly reduced. You must know that it took the British hundreds of years to reverse the British pirate image and become the current British gentleman. The British can only pinch their noses and drink it down. About compensation. Nasrullah first proposed that a caravan full of treasures in Russia was hijacked on the way to Alexandria, 25 people were killed, and property worth 3 million rubles was lost, about £333,300. Robert Peel knew very well that Nasrullah was talking nonsense and that he just wanted to continue to tangle with Britain, but Robert Peel did not want to continue to tangle with this matter, so he readily signed a compensation agreement to shut him up. Seeing that this was also possible, Lord Sewell, Prussian foreign minister, could not help but be eager to try. After all, money is not a big deal, not to mention that it is the royal family's goods, dates. Among our goods, there are a large number of Prince William's personal collections and artworks of great historical value. This is a huge loss for all mankind. Our country demands compensation of £200,000. Prince William, also known as the Prince of Cannonballs, is the younger brother of William IV, the benefactor of Bismarck, and the Emperor of the German Empire who was crowned in the Palace of Versailles. Of course, he was just a funny guy who was ready to spend 20,000 guilders to buy dates so that all officers could eat dates. Robert Peel signed the agreement with a stroke of his pen. But he noticed that there were traces of smearing on the agreement, and the 2 zeros seemed to be added later. But it doesn't matter. Anyway, it will be sealed immediately, and there is no need to worry about the Prussians doing anything else. Another point is that the wealthy Britain is not short of this hush money. Compared with the first 2 who shouted slogans, the Austrian diplomats are much more professional. The lost property, personnel, and handling costs are all clearly listed. But this makes Robert Peel feel that the Austrians are the real behind the scenes. Austria demanded compensation of £350,000, and all the requirements are supported by data. After all, this is related to the stability of the Italian region and Austria's first large-scale overseas trade. Metternich was very concerned and had asked officials to do their homework. The only result of doing this is that it looks more like being prepared. Nasrullah and Guizot couldn't help but applaud and praised, "It's well-reasoned and convincing." Robert Peel walked to the table of the Austrian delegation, signed his name, and stamped the Prime Minister's seal. Mr. Metternich, you are indeed the most cunning diplomat of this century. We will meet again. Metternich could only smile bitterly. He really didn't want to be the first to do this, but he couldn't explain it clearly now. He just asked for compensation. If Britain didn't pay compensation, the Austrian government would also have to compensate its merchants. They couldn't let this matter discourage them. Through this period of overseas trade, Metternich finally understood why the Crown Prince, Franz, always liked to say bread and candy are better than bullets and bayonets. After opening up overseas trade, the uprisings in northern Italy were significantly reduced. He had asked Vice King Giolet in Venice many times. But Giolet, a superior, didn't understand the situation of the people at all and couldn't explain it. Later, Metternich asked Marshal Radetsky, the commander of the Italian garrison. The old marshal wrote back to tell him that Italian factories are recruiting people, and young people are busy making money and have no time to continue the uprising. You know, since the Napoleonic Wars, there has been a small chaos in Italy every 3 years and a big chaos every 5 years. In order to maintain Austria's rule over northern Italy, Metternich racked his brains and sent troops many times to help the Papal States and the Kingdom of Naples stabilize the situation. However, what he did was not what he thought. From the earliest Carbonari to the later Young Italy, various rebellious parties emerged one after another. Austria allocated tens of millions of guilders every year to suppress the Italian Revolution, but the effect was minimal, and even the influence of the Revolutionary Party spread to the entire Apennine Peninsula. It was not until the opening of overseas trade that it gradually converged, and Metternich highly praised this bloodless and glorious solution. So in Metternich's eyes, in order to maintain Austria's overseas trade, everything was worth it. What's more, facing the bear that was going to sea and France that was interested in the lowlands, referring to the Netherlands and Belgium, the British had already been unable to take care of themselves. Palmerston, a tough opponent, was sent to India. How could Robert Peel have the energy to deal with Austria? The biggest losses in this riot were actually the French, because the French entered Egypt one step earlier than the British, but they were not as high profile as the British. The latest novel is first published on the 69th Book Forum. Of the 5,713 people killed in the riots, 4,100 were from Britain, 1,400 of the remaining 1,613 were from France, 50 were from Austria, and the remaining 163 were from various Italian states, Switzerland, Russia, Prussia, Belgium, etc. The French suffered economic losses of around 20 million francs, about £1.333 million, the main losses of which came from breach of contract due to delayed delivery of goods and the theft of antiques and excavation sites. After all, Egypt is one of the 4 ancient civilizations, and a large number of Egyptian cultural relics have been unearthed. The main buyers are the French, and France has used debt relations to obtain the right to excavate a large number of relics. But as the Egyptian national uprising intensified, the French archaeological team was not spared, and a large number of precious cultural relics were destroyed and resold at low prices. Guizot proposed a compensation of 30 million francs, about £2 million. As a businessman, he knew that he had to bargain, but looking at Robert Peel's style, it was probably unnecessary, and he could still make a small profit. But Guizot was disappointed. Robert Peel refused to sign the compensation agreement unless the compensation figure was changed to £500,000. Britain's loss was only £2 million, and the French actually asked for £2 million. Did they really think that Robert Peel was stupid? Robert Peel asked the French to produce relevant evidence to prove that the things excavated by France were cultural relics and worth that amount, otherwise he would compensate according to the price of the clay jar. The French certainly had no evidence, but they had evidence that the delay in the delivery of goods led to breach of contract. But Robert Peel didn't admit it at all. He felt that the French could forge the contract privately and refused to compensate. However, Britain also admitted that France did suffer losses. In view of the huge losses in French personnel, Britain decided to compensate twice the average amount of the previous Prussian, Austrian and Russian countries. Guizot intended to threaten Robert Peel by refusing to sign the Second London Agreement. But he found that it was completely unworkable, and the other 4 countries were ready to sign. After all, the British and Egyptians were paying for it, and they had no reason not to accept it. To be honest, Robert Peel has now put the whole of Europe against him. He feels that the whole of Europe is against him and is his enemy. Now the French are pointing at a pile of broken burial objects and saying that they are all priceless treasures. This makes Robert Peel feel humiliated. How much money do Russia, Austria, and Prussia want together? Damn the French. Seeing that the threat was useless, Guizot decided not to suffer a loss in front of him and agreed to Robert Peel's proposal. After all, most of those so-called archaeological teams are also participated by private capital, and the things they find will not be handed over to the country. So the Second London Agreement was officially signed. First, the Mediterranean coast of Egypt is an international co-managed area, stipulating that the Ottoman, British, French, Russian, Austria, and Prussia can station a maximum of 10,000 troops in Egypt. At the same time, it is necessary to lease Egyptian land and pay rent to Egypt, the amount of which is determined by the number of garrisons and the size of the land. The army and individuals cannot leave the concessions and cities without authorization and go deep into the interior of Egypt. Any European who goes deep into the middle and lower reaches of the Nile will not be protected by the Egyptian government. Second, the sanctions on the size of the Egyptian army will be lifted, but it cannot have warships of more than 1,000 tons and artillery with a caliber of more than 12 pounds. Third, Britain will compensate the Russian Empire with £333,300. Britain will compensate France with £600,000. Britain will compensate the Austrian Empire with £350,000. Britain will compensate Prussia with £200,000. Fourth, the Doomsday Ark will be declared a cult organization, and all countries should unite to eliminate the unstable factors that endanger world peace. Fifth, the Mamluks will be declared an illegal organization. Sixth, the Ottoman Empire, Britain, France, Russia, Austria, Prussia, and Egypt should jointly maintain the security and stability of the situation in Egypt. Seventh, Egypt has the responsibility to provide security protection for personnel from friendly countries and ensure their personal and property safety. If there are any losses in the future, compensation will be paid according to the price after clarifying the responsibilities. The Second London Agreement, after signing. Robert Peel's debut ended in a disastrous defeat. Prince Metternich once again became the focus of Europe, but he was no longer a peacemaker, but a conspirator. Guizot's success and failure were a catastrophe, and he managed to overcome it. Nesseldorf presented his spoils, £333,300, to His Majesty the Tsar, and Nicholas I returned the money to Nesseldorf in recognition of his achievements. Lord Sewell was also rewarded by the Prussian royal family, and from then on he embarked on a path of no return. Ali, Egyptian Pasha, I will be back. For Chak, you can't see me, you can't see me. I suddenly put it on the shelves. I wrote a little temporarily. Please forgive me. I didn't know it would be put on the shelves. I am really sorry. I will definitely revise this chapter in the future. Please don't leave me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224, Different Paths to the Same Destination. Schönbrunn Palace, the highest viewing pavilion in the Royal Garden, Arc de Triomphe. Franz, who had just left Mrs. Sophie's residence, was discovered by his sister Maria. Little Maria flew over and became a pendant on Franz's neck. It's not that Franz couldn't avoid it, but he didn't hide because he was afraid of hurting his sister. Little Maria didn't have to go to class, didn't need to take exams, and didn't know what a homework book was. She chased Franz just for fun. Brother, why are the second and third brothers chasing you? Little Maria asked in a baby voice. Mrs. Sophie was strict with the men in the family, but she was very doting on her only daughter. The result of doting was that she was like an ordinary aristocratic girl, who didn't have to go to class or study, as long as she was happy, eating, playing and sleeping all day. Maria was a princess, and she was held in the palm of her hands all day long. She didn't know the dangers of the world, so she couldn't understand why her two brothers were so angry. Because they are stupid and not motivated, Franz spread his hands, showing a very helpless expression. Maria hung on Franz's neck, pretending to be suddenly enlightened. Big brother's bullying again, I'm going to tell mother. Second and third brothers have worked very hard. They never dare to slack off in their studies and go to bed very late every day, unlike you, big brother, who flirts with women all day long. At the end of the speech, little Maria pouted. What's the situation? How am I not working hard? And what about flirting with women? Which mate is plotting against me? I think it's necessary to have a big purge in the palace. Franz pinched Maria's chubby little face. But then again, Franz never cared about the studies of his two younger brothers. Maximilian, the second oldest, is a self-righteous and arrogant kid, and he seems to be a little hostile to Franz. Ludwig gives people the impression of being stupid. In short, it's hard to describe the stupidity. After all, Franz came from the future, and his academic qualifications and knowledge are by no means comparable to those of children of this era. I didn't expect them to work so hard. Could it be that the royal family has also begun to roll inward? No one told me, I thought of it myself. Yo-ho. My sister is quite loyal, that's right. Maria couldn't help but feel proud, with her hands on her hips and her face up to the sky. I won't tell you, it was Sister Ruskner who told you. Franz couldn't help but feel ashamed. How could he look the most serious, but secretly the most unserious? Look, Kate Castle. Maria couldn't help but look in the direction Franz pointed. Of course there was nothing. When she came to her senses, Franz had already run away without a trace. Maria stamped her feet in anger, and suddenly she stepped on something, a bag of candy. Since Madame Sophie forbade Maria to eat too much candy to prevent her from getting too fat or having cavities, Maria had a deep obsession with candy. Seeing that there was no one around, she put the candy in the pocket of her skirt and ran back to her palace. Maximilian and Ludwig were led by Maya, a fairy, into the tree wall maze in the royal garden. Obviously, they didn't know that Maya was deliberately arranged by Franz to wait for them on the roadside. Maximilian also bribed Maya with 10 gold coins. Franz came to the commanding heights, of course, to appreciate the ugly appearance of his stinky brothers. But Franz didn't have much time to play like this. When he returned to the study, Sarah brought the recent operating conditions of the Artis Bank. The sales momentum of the Austrian Empire bonds was still strong due to the previous hype. The large amount of funds obtained from the sale of government bonds poured into the construction of Austrian railways, causing the Austrian railway stocks to soar. This is not a good thing. Small shareholders who invested in the railways sold their stocks to cash in. Fearing that the Artis Bank would dominate, Franz deliberately found some senior investors in Vienna. As a result, they took Franz as a sucker, raised the stock price and joined forces with small shareholders to cut Franz's leaks. Fortunately, Franz was not a completely ignorant fool. He discovered the stop-loss in time, but the loss was still not small, and nearly 100 million guilders of capital were locked up. At the same time, Franz also received a handwritten letter from Jacob Ardieth. Dear Archduke Franz, I have always known that you are extremely intelligent and far-sighted. But even the most experienced people can make mistakes. What's more, you are only 12 years old. The recent fluctuations in the 3 companies you invested in are very unusual. I hope you can pay more attention to them and wish you a healthy growth. Jacob Ardieth made Franz look a little embarrassed. After all, it was because he was worried about Jacob Ardieth that he asked Prince Metternich to introduce an investment manager to him. In the end, it was Jacob Ardieth who reminded him of the possible risks. Between February and April 1842, the stocks of the 3 companies, the Austrian Western Railway Company, the Great Illyrian Railway Company, and the Ring Austrian Railway Company, almost doubled. You should know that the Austrian Northern Railway Company of the Rothschild family at the same time only rose by 35% in 1841. This is the premise that the Northern Railway Company has completed the construction of the main road. It is not yet out of control. If they are left alone for a few more months, I don't know how high the stock price will be. While small shareholders are cashing out, a large number of retail investors, small nobles, small landlords, and even small shop owners have also participated. For a time, almost everyone in Vienna was speculating in stocks, and the coffee shop no longer read newspapers, but talked about the latest stock market. Vienna is just a microcosm of Austria, and a wave of stock speculation is spreading in Austria. This made Franz smell a hint of the threat of an economic crisis. The economic crisis in 1837 mainly affected Britain and the United States, but who can guarantee that the stock fever at this time will not become a precursor to the next economic crisis? Franz could only suppress the stock price himself to ensure that the temperature of the stock market would not be too high. At the same time, Franz also hired a large number of people to spread rumors to newspapers and coffee shops, saying that the Austrian government would check bad assets and prohibit malicious speculation. The stock market is a double-edged sword. When the stock market rises sharply, it will attract more investors to invest to a certain extent. In this way, companies can obtain more funds and their financing costs will also decrease, thereby promoting the development of listed companies and indirectly promoting social and economic development. However, making money too quickly will make people suffer from some bad habits, such as being lazy and unwilling to continue to work in the real industry, but focusing on speculating on stock prices. In this way, when the capital bubble bursts, not only will investors suffer losses, but the national economy will also experience drastic fluctuations, and even a Great Depression will occur, triggering an economic crisis. Therefore, France needs to suppress stock prices to prevent the stock market from overheating. Of course, the stocks of some important companies still need to be raised to prevent someone from fishing in troubled waters. It refers to the French financial consortium. These people have too much money to spend, but they prefer to make quick money rather than working in the real industry. The recent hot stock market in Austria will naturally attract this group of vampires. They quickly targeted several Austrian companies with great potential, and took advantage of Franz's opportunity to suppress the stock price to seize the opportunity to control the equity. But Franz, who suffered a loss once, how could he make the same mistake a second time? While reducing holdings, they had anticipated possible situations, reserved controlling shares, and secretly issued additional shares. When the news of the additional shares came out, these investors could only stop losses and leave, but were cut by Franz. As for the senior investment managers introduced by Prince Metternich before, Franz had to kick them all out. After all, these guys who value money over life don't care about the national economy, social stability, etc. In addition, the Vienna Royal Insurance Company has received continuous orders since its opening. In particular, companies involved in overseas trade almost all have insurance policies with the Vienna Royal Insurance Company. After all, Franz's original purpose was to escort Austria's overseas trade. Moreover, the cost is the lowest in Austria, and the background is endorsed by the Austrian royal family. There is almost no reason not to choose this company. In addition, the Vienna Royal Insurance Company has launched a cheap pension insurance. However, it is unpopular in Austria and almost no one buys it. After all, this kind of insurance must be paid for more than 20 years, and you can only benefit after the age of 60. At this time, the average life expectancy in Austria is only 34 years old, and the average life expectancy of the nobility is only 46 years old. Many people have today but no tomorrow, so who would think about what will happen after 60? What's more serious is that the Austrian Empire is still based on the family unit, and the elderly are usually supported by the family, so there is almost no situation where the elderly are left without support. The latest novel is first published in the 69th book bar. Medical insurance is sold out. After all, in this era where bloodletting is used to treat diseases, it is still difficult to see a doctor. Of course, there are ways to see a doctor for free in Austria. You can either go to the church and let the priests feed you all kinds of strange things, Chinese medicine, or use acupuncture, cupping, smoke, moxibustion, or remove tendons and bones, massage. Or go to the Austrian National Hospital and sign a voluntary free medical contract, also known as a life and death agreement, to let those Frankensteins who just graduated from school do live experiments on you. So Austrians are still very willing to buy medical insurance, but they don't know that it is the church and the national hospital that cooperate with the Vienna Royal Insurance Company. As for accident insurance, Franz had to stop selling it in order to reduce the recent continuous increase in the suicide rate. For example, gamblers who can't afford it will buy themselves an insurance policy and then commit suicide to pay back the money. Some unscrupulous casinos will even fake the scene to make a profit, and some will even go to the streets to cheat insurance. Russia, north of St. Petersburg, a royal hunting ground somewhere. In the ice and snow of Russia, several people were tied to several wooden stakes. A soldier poured hot water on one of them. The man who was drenched in hot water first screamed miserably, and then quickly turned into an ice sculpture. Then an officer took out a single gun and fired a shot at the ice sculpture. The bullet made a dull sound. "Damn it, it's not frozen solid yet, it can't be broken." The officer pounded the muzzle of the gun and turned to the other people and said, "Do you have anything else to confess? If you want to live, tell me quickly, otherwise the blizzard will come and you won't be able to untie the rope." I said, I just happened to pass by and heard their conversation, and I was pulled here to be a conscript. I am innocent. They said they are the successors of the will of the Decembrists. The clerk on the side was taking notes with difficulty, complaining from time to time. "It's minus 30 degrees, and there is a strong north wind. What can I use to take notes outdoors?" Soon the officer collected the confessions, trotted all the way to a small house, and knocked on the door carefully to enter. Walking through the corridor, Alexander, who had just taken a hot bath, was lying on the bed, enjoying the massage of his two mistresses with a comfortable look. The officer handed the confession to a servant, who entered the room and stood at attention and was about to speak. "Is it another ghost who claims to be a Decembrist?" Alexander asked impatiently. "Yes, Your Highness, since the assassination, Russia has never stopped pursuing the assassin. But all the evidence points to the Decembrists. But if the Decembrists really have such a great power, why don't they directly assassinate the Tsar, or the Crown Prince?" This is obviously a deliberate frame-up, and Alexander did not expect that the other party would have such a great power. No wonder his father always said, "Be careful behind you." It's true at this point, but after this time, Most of the forces lurking in Russia have been eliminated, and they should be able to live a peaceful life. However, the subsequent investigation was not completely in vain. At least he found out that there were more than one group of people who wanted to assassinate Franz. Alexander couldn't help but sigh. What a sin his child had done. Princess Anna, who was in class at this time, really looked like a princess. But she sneezed suddenly, ruining her image. When she heard that Anna was going to class, her mother and her aunt sat together and suspected that the little princess had a brain burn due to illness. His father and His Majesty the Tsar opened a handicap privately. Nicholas I earned £80,000, about 720,000 rubles, in the Serbian War. The tribal armed forces in Afghanistan also won frequently last year. Although the British have improved today, the cost has far exceeded their expectations. Gambling is addictive, so Nicholas I and his brother opened a bet. Grand Duke Mikhail Pavlovich knew his daughter very well. The little girl's interest came and went quickly. Grand Duke Mikhail Pavlovich bet that his daughter would not last more than a week. Although the ministers and eunuchs were coerced by Nicholas I, it was still exciting to play with the emperor, and everyone placed bets. Judging from the results of the bet, everyone had low expectations for Princess Anna. Few ministers thought that Princess Anna's enthusiasm for learning could last for more than 3 months. Nicholas I might be seeking excitement, or he might really think that his niece had changed her character. He bet that Princess Anna could persist for more than a year. This kind of bet requires a winner to take all. The Emperor and the Grand Duke each put in 500,000 rubles as the prize, and the ministers each put in 100,000 rubles. The stakes were as high as 13.5 million rubles. I don't know what Princess Anna, who is studying hard, would think if she knew that her father and uncle were betting on her. The Russian court customs have a strong German flavor. Girls don't need to study either. It's enough to take care of their husbands and children. Of course, the appearance of Teresa and Catherine the Great was completely unexpected. Princess Anna's stubbornness is obvious to all, and even the professor who teaches her makes fun of her from time to time. Princess Anna, what is the source of your motivation for learning? Do you like watching others lose money? Or is it the power of love? Princess Anna kicked the teacher in the crotch and said bitterly, Alexander, you damn guy, thanks to the book friend Lu Jichuan for the reward and book friends 35,271, Fixiang Yizir, Zia Omuj, Kidian event, Lu Jichuan, you grabbed your attending physician's mobile phone again, 20200526094618467's monthly ticket, and the support of all book friends. In the future, please support and subscribe. Chapter 225 Franz, the Demon. The farmer hoes the field at noon, and his sweat drips down to the ground. Who knows that every grain of rice on the plate is the result of hard work? Franz and Taffel came to the royal estate together, along with a large number of Viennese dandies. Although everyone has seen the royal estate, there are not many opportunities to visit the royal estate with a crown prince. Franz suddenly sneezed. It must be some beautiful woman who is thinking about you, Taffel immediately flattered him. If they were not friends who grew up together, Franz would have kicked him down long ago. H.U., Alexander sneezed. Mistress number 1 on the side hurriedly put a bath towel on his shoulders, fearing that he would catch a cold. Mistress number 2 jumped out of bed and hurriedly added charcoal to the stove. The steam was thick, and with the 2 mistresses serving him wholeheartedly, Alexander felt a little sleepy. To be honest, because of the previous events, his relationship with his father had become much closer, but he still had no interest in state affairs. Anyway, his father would take care of everything. Alexander could hardly imagine what Russia would be like without Nicholas I. Thinking of Franz's father and uncle being like that, Alexander couldn't help but feel a little sad for Franz. The family couldn't stand it, and there was such a big family business, no wonder he was like that since he was a child. It's pitiful that he has no childhood, Alexander said to himself, and then slowly fell asleep. Hoeing the field at noon, sweat dripping on the ground. In the vast Austrian countryside, farmers, serfs, are indeed waving sickles to harvest winter wheat in the fields. But a change is brewing. The Austrian Ministry of Agriculture has reduced the price of horse-drawn harvesters across the country, with the aim of improving the work efficiency of Austrian farmers. But the effect is not ideal. Austrian farmers have no money to buy harvesters, and Austrian nobles and landlords think that this thing is a pure waste of money. After all, it costs money to buy machinery, but manpower does not cost money. No wonder these things have not been popularized after being invented for nearly 10 years and improved by Austrian craftsmen. In fact, this was the case throughout Europe at that time. People who had no money could not afford it, and those who had money did not want to buy it. So if these things want to really settle down in Austria, they still need the help of these dudes. These dudes say they are friends of Taffy, but in terms of age, they range from 10 to 30. They are not qualified to accompany the prince to study. But they can, and they are good at playing with him. But what they didn't expect was that Franz actually called them to the royal manor. This wilderness, at a glance, is either farmland or fruit trees. What's fun? Some noble ladies, on the other hand, feel that their chance has come. After all, the rumors about Franz, after being relayed by Archbishop Rauscher and the professors driven away by Madame Sophie, and the recent strong rise of the Artis family, there is absolutely reason to believe that Franz, the future emperor of the Austrian Empire, is a collection of the quirks of dozens of generations of Austrian monarchs, possessing wisdom and endless desires that are difficult for ordinary people to reach. Although people who are familiar with Franz know that this is by no means the truth, these people are helpless. Prime Minister Metternich's clarification made it easier for people to associate Metternich's former title of butterfly ambassador with Franz's position as a teacher. The facts have changed beyond recognition, but the facts are not important. What is important is what people want to believe. Franz certainly knew this. After all, intelligence gathering has always been one of his most important things. But in the Habsburg family, which is full of Buddhas, there is nothing wrong with having a tyrant. After all, gentlemen can be deceived by tricks, and in the capitalist era that is about to enter, the moral standards have also changed. Honest people are no longer respected by society, but have become a disgusting group. Even if you want to continue to be an honest person, you have to look smart. The scenery in the royal manor is nice. After all, the taxes here are very low, and as long as the royal family members who come to visit every year don't see any big problems, there will be no punishment. The rent of the royal manor is 20% to 30% of the harvest, but even if it is increased to 50% to 60%, there are still a large number of farmers breaking their heads to squeeze in. Although Austrian law does not allow rent to exceed half of the harvest, including serfs, the landlords have many ways to bypass this law and leave only enough food for the peasants. For example, instead of collecting rent in kind, they ask the peasants to pay in money. First, they forcibly purchase the peasants' crops at a low price, and then ask the peasants to pay rent at a high price. Or they ask the peasants who grow grain to pay beef and mutton, and so on. Starving serfs to death in Austria is a felony, but peasants are not protected by this law. That's why there is a strange scene where Hungarian landlords encourage serfs to escape. Therefore, the Austrian royal estate has a strange tradition, that is, the more disasters there are, the more wars there are, the more crops they turn in. After all, this group of people also know that there is no landlord in the outside world who is kinder than the royal family. Since the time of Teresa, the serfs in the Austrian royal estate have been released and become peasants. But from the moment they became peasants, the royal family had the right to fire them. According to the bizarre rules set by the Second Agreement, the worst performing 3% of the royal estates will be fired each year, and the same number of landless farmers, vagrants, will be introduced every year. These old farmers who have worked for the royal family for generations often roll up their sleeves when the newcomers are still immersed in their dreams. Of course, they are also the first to adopt new agricultural tools. After all, this will be more efficient. The dandies from Vienna were originally waiting for hunting or dancing. But Franz's poem set the tone for today's activities. Dandy Man A, what is Archduke Franz going to do? He is not planning to let us go to plow the land. Dandy Man B, it's hard to say. Did the Archduke say that every grain of rice on the plate is hard-earned? The banquet will definitely not be held. It is estimated that we will work for him for free, and then have a simple meal, and finally let us go. Dandy Man A is a hereditary noble in Vienna. He has never left Vienna in his life. He is a typical unlearned man. Dandy B is also a hereditary noble, but his family attaches great importance to education. He went to university and his family members are involved in politics, so he has a certain understanding of Franz. Dandy C, bah. Why do you want us to work for him for free? I think the Habsburg family is finished, so I'd better emigrate to France as soon as possible. I heard that the moon in Paris is round and the air is sweet. Dandy C comes from a new noble family. He is a big capitalist who became an aristocrat by exchanging money for power. Therefore, he has no respect for the royal family, and he doesn't care about the fact that France is Austria's mortal enemy. Dandy C's words naturally failed to resonate with the other dandies, but instead aroused the hostility of some dandies who have a feud with France. Dandy A: "Oh? I heard that the French like to use the guillotine to chop people. A big guillotine falls down, and the head flies far away. Then the French will eat bread while dipping their hands in the victim's blood." Dandy B: "Yes, I heard that this is how they deal with the king and nobles of their country. Otherwise, Lord Kroll, you should give up your noble title." Dandy A: That's right, that's right. When you go to France, remember to give up your noble title first, otherwise when you come back, we can only attend your funeral." Dandy B: "Yes, yes. If you die, what about your beautiful wife?" Dandy A: "To comfort your wife, should I wear black or white?" Dandy B: "I think I should choose black, so it looks more solemn. After all, death is the greatest thing." Dandy C: "You bunch of trash, garbage living in the last century." Their status was not high, so they could only stand at the end of the crowd. So Franz and Taffy couldn't hear what they were saying at all. Franz didn't care even more. He cared about the performance of the agricultural machinery in the future. But Taffy was not very happy. Although he was just a child, there were not many people in the country who dared to make noise when he was talking. He couldn't help but get angry and turned back to look at the source of the noise. The dandies were frightened. Taffy's family was a real noble and capitalist. His father and grandfather were hereditary members of the Austrian noble senate. The name was intimidating, but they actually had no power, but the members were all powerful. His two uncles, one was a local official in Moravia, and the other was a star in the Vienna social circle, Simon Taffy, mentioned above. The Taffy family owned 400,000 acres of land in Moravia, and also owned 1/3 of the shares of the Danube Shipping Company. It was also the owner of the largest shipyard in Austria. The Taff family owns more than 100 high-end restaurants and 2,000 hotels, but they were not called hotels at that time, they were called hotel restaurants, in Vienna, Brno, Ostrava and Olomouc. In addition, the Taff family also built a railway from Brno to Vienna and invested in almost all the industries invested by Franz. Taff, full name Edward Taff, was destined to be one of the most powerful people in the future Austrian Empire from the day he was born. Historically, Taff became the Prime Minister of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his reign was second only to Metternich, so a group of fearless dandies were frightened and shut up by a look from a little kid. Let's get back to the story. The latest novel is published on the 6th-9th book bar. I have something to sell. I hope you can patronize me. With it, a farmer can harvest hundreds or even thousands of acres of land with 2 horses. Dandy A: "Fuck, you're selling goods." Dandy B: "Not bad. Buy some and take it back. It's like serving the motherland." Dandy A: "What's good? You haven't seen the goods yet." Dandy C: "It seems that the Habsburg family is really broke, and they don't even let go of our money. I think it's better to immigrate to Paris as soon as possible." Of course, some people still care about the performance of farm tools, such as Taffy. Archduke Franz: "What does it look like? How does it work?" Taffy couldn't remember 2 complicated lines, and he had no talent for acting, so he could only keep it as short as possible to avoid fatal mistakes. "One person can harvest hundreds or even thousands of acres of land?" "It's a lie. I'm very curious. I really want to see it. It's amazing. I want one too." In comparison, the agents hired by Franz were much more reliable. After a few stinky fish were mixed up, the dandies also became interested. After all, there was nothing to play in this place except farmland and orchards. Franz saw that the effect was achieved, so he followed suit. "In this case, why don't we all come and take a look?" Bordeaux, as Franz's aide-de-camp, Bordeaux must attend such occasions. Moreover, in his eyes, these harvesters are simply the key to changing the war. Imagine that a farmer can only support 5 people. In order to maintain the normal operation of the country, a certain number of farmers must be left to engage in agriculture. But what if a farmer can support 50 people? In that case, Austria can recruit more farmers to the front line, which means that the current army of the Austrian Empire can be multiplied several times. By then, not only the French, but even the Russians will have to bow down. Seeing the signal given by the Crown Prince, Bordeaux immediately led his men to drive the horses and started to act. This harvester is a new harvester designed by Franz and modified by the Royal Academy of Sciences. It is much more advanced than the most popular Mickek harvester at that time. Franz also invented grain seeders, lawn mowers, and corn seeders. Of course, the power is still mainly animal power. Although steam-powered machinery has made great progress, the size of the steam engine is still relatively large and expensive. It is only suitable for super-large farms and is not suitable for the mountainous terrain in Austria. The area suitable for such a large harvester is not yet under Franz's control. Driven by horses, the harvester passes through the wheat field. As the wheel rolls, the wheat in front is pressed down, and then the sickle cuts, and the wheat ears and straw are cut into two sections, and the cycle repeats. In just 10 minutes, the harvester has completed the amount that a skilled farmer can complete in a day. After that, there are also tillers, grain seeders, and lawn mowers that are displayed in turn. Looking at the stunned look of the people around, I can't help but feel a little proud. But what Franz doesn't know is that this group of dandies is thinking about this. Only Teffy asked in a low voice. With this kind of machinery, we can cultivate more land, so will people still starve to death? Teffy is a kind-hearted man. After the Battle of Nordsee last year, he followed his father to visit the disaster area. Seeing that the victims were starving to death, he felt very sorry and returned to the cart to distribute his food to the poor. However, there were countless victims, and the food in the Teffy family's caravan was not enough. Soon, begging turned into fighting, and finally the captain of the guard had to shoot to drive away the victims. But after that, Teffy wanted to grow enough food, at least no one would starve to death. After Teffy's father knew about it, he bought 10,000 acres of land in Vojvodina and gave it to his son, but warned his son. In the future, you can only use the harvest from these 10,000 acres of land to help the poor, unless you can inherit the family business and surpass your father and grandfather. At that time, you can do whatever you want with the Teffy family's property, but the only answer to Teffy was another poem about pity for farmers. Plant a grain of millet in spring and harvest 10,000 grains in autumn. There is no idle land in the world, but farmers still starve to death. Teffy felt an inexplicable loss. In his eyes, Franz seemed to be able to do anything. His family and his teacher, Archbishop Rauscher, also thought that Franz could do anything, but he got this answer. The playboys cursed in their hearts, Franz is possessed by the devil again. Why does he always say such strange things, as if he is not a human being? Thanks to the book friends Leon Ichwin and MFJ for their monthly tickets and all the book friends for their support and subscription. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.